Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Claire O'Connor had heard about Hollow Creek before, but the stories were nothing like the town she was now driving into. The locals painted it as a sleepy little place, a town too quiet for its own good, a town with a reputation for being stuck in time. But as Claire passed the dilapidated houses and the overgrown streets, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that clung to the air like a heavy fog. The GPS beeped, pulling her out of her thoughts, arriving at destination. She pulled into the small town square, the buildings in various states of disrepair. To an outsider, Hollow Creek looked abandoned, like a place frozen in time and abandoned by progress. It was the perfect backdrop for the feature article her editor had assigned her. She'd been told to write a piece about this forgotten town, its quaint charm, and the history that seemed to haunt it. Claire parked her car and stepped out, taking in the strange stillness of the place. There were no bustling crowds, no children playing in the streets. In fact, there didn't seem to be anyone around. The only sound was the distant wind rustling the autumn leaves and the faint creak of a sign swinging above the local diner. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked towards the diner. It was open, the flickering neon lights a welcoming contrast to the gray sky. The door chimed as she entered, and a wave of warmth hit her like a comforting embrace. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man with thick glasses looked up. He had a kind face but a weary look in his eyes, as though he hadn't slept properly in years. His name tag read Henry. "Morning," he greeted, his voice low but not unfriendly. "What can I get you?" "I'm Claire. I'm here to write about the town for a local magazine," she said, sliding onto one of the stools at the counter. "I thought I'd start with breakfast. Some eggs and toast, if you don't mind." "Sure thing," Henry replied, nodding. "I'll get that for you. Don't get too many visitors around here these days." Claire smiled politely. "I've heard a lot about the place. Stories of its history, the people." Henry's eyes flickered for a moment, his expression becoming harder to read. He paused, placing a plate in front of her without saying much. He was clearly used to outsiders, but there was something in his gaze that made Claire uneasy. She didn't know if it was the town's strange, quiet atmosphere or something deeper, an unspoken tension that hung in the air like a shadow. "People are people," Henry said a little too quickly. "But Hollow Creek? It's always been a town with secrets. Not all of them are worth knowing." Claire nodded, unsure how to respond. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled at the comment, but she chalked it up to the town's isolation. Small towns were often built on rumors, after all. She took a bite of her eggs, hoping to move the conversation along. "Is it true that the town's been around for centuries? I've heard it has a pretty colorful history." "Colorful is one way to put it," Henry muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. "You ever hear about the Blackwoods?" Claire's interest piqued. He pulled out her notepad. "No, I haven't. Who were they?" Henry's expression darkened. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "The Blackwoods were something. You can say they were founders of this place. Real influential family, wealthy, powerful. But there's a story no one likes to tell." Claire scribbled in her notebook, eager to know more. "What kind of story?" Henry glanced over his shoulder, as though checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned even closer. "There's an old cave system beneath the town. Long ago, they used to say something. Something lived there. A beast. A creature that they kept locked away, trapped in the deep." Claire's pen hovered over the page. "Beast?" Henry's face twisted, a mix of disbelief and fear. "They called it the beast beneath. Some say it was part of the town's founding. Sacrifices were made to keep it sealed away. There's talk about an ancient ritual, one that the Blackwoods were involved in. But the thing about a curse like that is, it doesn't stay buried forever." Claire blinked, unsure if she was hearing him right. "A beast? Like a legend, a myth?" Henry shook his head slowly, wiping a glass. "The people around here don't talk about it much, but that curse, it was real. You don't want to go digging too deep into the past of Hollow Creek. Trust me, the town's been quiet for a reason. Claire could sense the conversation was reaching an end, but her curiosity was already piqued. She had been sent to write a feature on Hollow Creek's history, but this was something far more intriguing than a quaint town. Okay, she said with a light laugh, trying to break the tension. I'll take it easy. But tell me, Henry, what else do people know about the Blackwoods? Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a long breath and wiped down the counter one more time. They vanished, you know. The whole family. One day gone. Just disappeared. The townsfolk used to think it was the curse. That the beast, well, it didn't stay locked away for long. Claire put down her fork, her appetite fading in the wake of the conversation. How do you know all of this? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Henry shrugged. I grew up here, heard the stories. Some of us remember, some of us still believe. There was a long pause between them. The quiet hum of the diner seemed louder now. Claire could hear the distant ringing of the telephone, the soft sound of wind brushing the windows. Be careful what you dig up, Henry added quietly, his voice low. Sometimes it's better not to know what's buried beneath. Claire smiled, though her heart raced. She didn't want to seem too eager, but she was already formulating her next questions. The town's history, the Blackwoods, and the beast beneath, this was going to make a fascinating article. But as Henry turned away to tend to something else in the back, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she had just heard the beginning of something far darker than she had expected. The next few days in Hollow Creek felt like they were slipping through Claire's fingers. Every time she thought she had a firm grip on the town's history, something would shift, like the town itself was trying to hide its secrets from her. After her unsettling conversation with Henry, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the Blackwoods and the beast beneath. The more she tried to dismiss the stories as superstition, the more she felt drawn to them. She spent her days at the local library, which was little more than a dusty room with old books and newspapers stacked high on wooden shelves. The librarian, a woman named Evelyn, was cordial enough but hardly willing to help. It seemed as though everyone in town wanted to discourage her from digging into Hollow Creek's past. But Claire was relentless. One afternoon, after hours of combing through yellowing pages of newspapers, she found something. It was a small, clipped article from the early 1900s, hidden in a folder labeled The Blackwoods. The headline read, Tragic Disappearance of Blackwood Family, Cause Unknown. Her fingers shook as she read the article. March 13th, 1913, the Blackwood family has vanished without a trace. The local authorities were called after. Concerned neighbors reported that the family had not been seen for several days. The house was found abandoned, and in it, authorities discovered disturbing evidence suggesting foul play. The family's servants, too, have gone missing, though there are no signs of forced entry or struggle. The townspeople are growing increasingly nervous, as rumors of dark rituals and curses surrounding the family have resurfaced. Claire couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. There was more to the story than just the family disappearing. The article hinted at something darker, something none of the townspeople were willing to discuss. What had really happened to the Blackwoods? She needed to know. After weeks of staying in the town, Claire felt she had gathered enough information to form a clearer picture of Hollow Creek's history. But one piece of the puzzle still eluded her, the cave system Henry had mentioned. Evelyn had confirmed its existence, but warned Claire not to venture near it. The caves are dangerous, Evelyn had said, her voice tight. People who go there never come back the same. If they come back at all. Claire didn't care. She knew she had to see the caves for herself. She wasn't going to write some fluff piece about a sleepy town. She wanted the truth. The caves were located on the outskirts of town, near the old Blackwood estate. Claire took a map from the library and drove out to the edge of Hollow Creek, where the dirt road narrowed and trees grew thick, their gnarled branches reaching for the sky like twisted hands. The estate was in ruins, a once grand house now reduced to rubble, its foundation cracked and crumbling. The Blackwoods hadn't just vanished. Their legacy had been wiped out. Claire parked her car and stood in front of the broken gates, staring at the eerie mansion behind the overgrown ivy. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest sound of distant howls. She shook off the chill that crept up her spine and turned her attention to the path leading down the hill toward the caves. The earth here was soft, damp from the recent rains, and the air smelled of decay and moss. The further Claire walked, the more oppressive the silence became. It felt as though the trees themselves were watching her, waiting for something. The deeper she went into the woods, the darker it became, the light from the fading afternoon sun barely piercing through the thick canopy above. And then she found it. The entrance to the cave was hidden behind a curtain of vines, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. A narrow passage led into the earth, dark and cold. Claire hesitated only for a moment before stepping into the shadows, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The walls of the cave were slick with moisture, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and stone. As she ventured deeper, the sound of water dripping echoed through the passageways. She could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on her, as if the very ground was alive, watching her every move. She reached an opening in the cave, a large chamber with jagged rocks protruding from the floor and ceiling. The walls here were covered in strange, ancient symbols, glyphs that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Claire ran her fingers over one of the markings, and for a brief moment, she felt a jolt of energy surge through her hand, as though the cave itself was alive, aware of her presence. Her heart began to race as she took a step back, scanning the walls for more clues. It was then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A massive stone slab was embedded in the far wall of the cave, cracked and covered in layers of dust. The markings on it were similar to those on the walls, but these were more intricate, more deliberate. The seal, she realized, was old, far older than anything in the town's recorded history. And then she saw it. A faint glow flickered around the edges of the slab, like a dying ember, just beneath the surface of the stone. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for the glow. The moment her fingers brushed against the cold stone, the ground beneath her feet rumbled. She stumbled back, the earth shifting beneath her as the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The glow intensified, and the cave seemed to come alive, as if it were awakening from a long slumber. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, her instincts screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. She had to know. She had to understand what had happened here. Before she could make another move, the rumbling stopped. The cave fell silent again, and Claire was left standing in the dark, holding her breath. She knew then that she had found something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The moment Claire touched the stone, everything seemed to pause, like time itself held its breath. Her heart hammered in her chest, and the cave was deathly quiet except for the distant, echoing sound of her own pulse. She pulled her hand back, but the eerie glow remained, flickering like the last remnants of a dying fire. Claire's instinct screamed at her to turn and run, but something, some force she couldn't explain, held her in place. The air felt thicker now, as if the walls of the cave were closing in on her. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the earth, so deep it seemed to come from the core of the world itself. She spun around, flashlight trembling in her hand, but there was nothing there. No creature, no monster, but the presence was undeniable. The cave itself seemed to hum with a life of its own, a vibrating energy that she couldn't escape. Claire's breath came in short bursts, and she stepped backward, keeping her eyes trained on the stone slab. She wasn't imagining it. The glow was intensifying, spreading out from the edges of the slab like a slow burn, creeping into the walls of the cave. The ancient symbols on the surface seemed to pulse, alive with some kind of force that resonated deep in her bones. She needed to get out of there. She had no idea what she had triggered, but whatever it wasn't good. Just as she turned to make her way back toward the entrance, a shrill sound pierced the air, a sharp, unearthly screech that made her blood run cold. The sound came from behind her, from the very depths of the cave. The rumbling started again, louder this time, shaking the floor beneath her feet. Claire whipped around. The stone slab trembled, the symbols on its surface twisting, bending. Then, With a violent crack, the slab split open like a door, revealing a yawning abyss beyond. From the blackness came something terrible, a shadow, massive and hulking, its shape too large to comprehend fully. Claire's eyes widened in horror as she saw the glint of eyes glowing from the darkness, red and hungry, peering out from the nothingness. The beast. It was real. Before she could react, a deafening roar erupted from the cavern, shaking the walls and sending loose rocks tumbling to the floor. The creature surged forward, and Claire's blood ran cold. Every primal instinct in her screamed to run, to escape, but her legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground by fear. The creature lunged, its massive form rushing toward her, claws scraping against the stone floor. Its eyes, red like burning embers, fixed on her, and Claire knew, with sickening clarity, that it was coming for her. With a scream, she spun around and bolted, the sound of her own breath deafening in her ears as she raced down the narrow tunnel toward the exit. Behind her, the creature's growl reverberated through the cave. Each step, it took a deep rumble that shook the very air. Claire didn't dare look back, but she could feel its presence, like a shadow stalking her every move. She could hear the scraping of its claws on the rocks, getting closer and closer. She reached the entrance to the cave, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the flashlight in her pocket. The light flickered weakly in her grip, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her, as if the darkness itself were reaching out. With one final burst of adrenaline, she made it out of the cave, stumbling onto the forest floor. The beast's growl echoed from deep within the cavern, but she didn't stop. She ran. She ran until her legs burned and her breath came in ragged gasps. She had to get back to the town, to safety. By the time Claire reached the outskirts of Hollow Creek, her pulse was still racing. She stumbled through the abandoned streets, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. The beast, the creature that had been locked away for centuries, now free to wreak havoc once again. She reached the diner, the only place that seemed to offer any semblance of comfort. Henry was standing by the counter when she burst through the door, her face pale and drenched in sweat. She barely registered his concerned gaze as she collapsed onto one of the stools, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "Claire!" Henry's voice was soft, almost worried. "What happened to you?" "I saw it," Claire gasped. "I saw the beast. The one the town talks about. The one that was locked away. It's real, Henry. It's real." Henry's face went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on a rag. He didn't look at her, instead focusing on the counter, his voice low. "I warned you. I warned you not to dig too deep." Claire was still shaking. She grabbed the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "What is it? What's going on in this town?" Henry looked up at her, his eyes filled with an emotion Claire couldn't quite place. Something between fear and resignation. The Blackwoods weren't just a family. They were part of something much older, something darker. The beast. It was part of a pact, a curse that's tied to this land. Claire shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. A pact? A curse? What kind of curse? And why hasn't anyone told me about it? The Blackwoods. They didn't just disappear, Claire. They sealed the beast away, yes, but they didn't do it willingly. They were forced into it. The creature, whatever it is tied to Hollow Creek's very foundation. It's been waiting, biding its time. And now that the seal's broken, there's nothing stopping it from coming back. Claire felt the air grow colder. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. How do we stop it? Henry didn't answer immediately. He stared at her, his eyes filled with something Claire couldn't place. Then, slowly, he said, "You can't stop it. It's too late. The beast is free, and it will take everything in its path." The words Henry had spoken lingered in Claire's mind like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. The beast is free, and it will take everything in its path. It was as though the ground had fallen out beneath her, leaving her to plummet into the unknown. The curse, the creature, the Blackwoods, it was all connected. And now that the creature had been released, there was no turning back. But something didn't sit right with Claire. The weight of Henry's words was crushing, but there was something about his eyes, something about the way he'd said, "It's too late," that made her doubt his certainty. The diner was nearly empty. The only sounds the clink of Henry's rag against the counter and the faint hum of the fridge. Claire's heart beat erratically in her chest as she tried to piece together what she had just learned. "What exactly happened to the Blackwoods?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't let it go. She needed more answers. Henry seemed to hesitate, as though debating whether to tell her more. He wiped the counter for the third time, his hands moving with a careful precision that seemed almost mechanical. "They were the guardians," he said quietly. "The Blackwood family, I mean. They were chosen long ago to watch over the beast and keep it sealed. They performed rituals, sacrifices. Everything they did was to keep the town safe, to keep the creature from rising." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Sacrifices? What kind of sacrifices?" Henry didn't answer immediately, and Claire could see the struggle behind his eyes. "I don't know the full story. All I know is that when the Blackwoods disappeared, they took the key to the seal with them. The creature's seal. I mean, it's been locked away in that cave for over a century. But I guess something triggered it. Something. Or someone." Claire's pulse quickened. What triggered it? Henry finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "You did." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. "Me? I triggered it." Henry nodded, looking away. "You touched the stone, Claire. The one in the cave. The seal was weakened over time, but when you made contact with it, it's like you opened a door the Blackwoods sealed shut. You don't even realize what you've done, but it's not just the beast that's out. There's something else too. Something worse." Claire felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Worse than the beast. Henry's face darkened. "Yes, the beast is dangerous, yes, but it was always a part of Hollow Creek, bound to it by the curse. But there's something worse that has been lying dormant, waiting. The real horror." Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What? What is it?" Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the back door of the diner, as though ensuring no one was listening. He took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "It's the entity that created the curse in the first place, the one that the Blackwoods were meant to keep imprisoned. It's not just a beast. It's a force, an ancient darkness. And now that the seal has been broken, it can spread, it can infect this entire town, and everything in its path." Claire felt a chill sweep over her, colder than anything the night had to offer. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to stay grounded, to stay focused. "But what can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do we stop it?" Henry's face twisted with a mixture of sadness and guilt. He stood there in silence for a long moment, his shoulders slumped. "You can't. Not without making the ultimate sacrifice." Claire's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "You have to close the seal, Claire. You have to stop the entity from spreading. But to do that, you have to be the one to lock it back inside the cave. And that means taking the beast with it." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "But that would mean I have to die." Henry finished for her, his voice heavy with regret. "Yes, the only way to ensure the seal holds is for the one who breaks it to close it again. And that means ending yourself. The curse demands balance. One life to stop the others from being taken." Claire felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "No, I can't." "You don't have a choice," Henry said softly, his voice full of sorrow. "The town will be consumed if you don't. The darkness. It will spread like wildfire. People will die. Worse than that, the entity will continue to grow, and soon it will be too powerful to stop. There's no other way." Claire stood frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on her like 1,000 pounds. She had come to Hollow Creek for a story, for answers. But this wasn't a story. This was reality, and it was a nightmare she couldn't escape. The door to the diner creaked open, pulling Claire from her thoughts. Evelyn, the librarian, stepped inside, her eyes immediately falling on Claire. Her gaze was cold, calculating, almost as if she knew what Claire had just been told. "What's going on, Henry?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp. "What are you telling her?" Henry stood straighter, wiping his hands on the rag one last time. He glanced at Claire, his face lined with frustration. I'm telling her the truth, and it's not something you want to hear either, Evelyn. Evelyn took a step closer, her expression softening just a little. The truth won't set her free, Henry. Not this time. Claire felt a rush of confusion as she watched the two of them exchange silent words, something passing between them that she couldn't understand. But then Evelyn's gaze locked onto Claire's, and for the first time, Claire saw the hint of fear in the older woman's eyes. You can't do it, Claire, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. You're not the one who's meant to stop it. You're just the one who woke it up. The town has its own way of dealing with this, and you'll never leave alive. Claire's thoughts were a blur. The words Evelyn had just spoken hit her like a wave crashing against the shore, leaving her with no ground to stand on. You'll never leave alive. What did that mean? Was it a warning? A threat? Or was Evelyn just as desperate as everyone else? She looked between Henry and Evelyn, her mind racing. Both of them knew more than they were letting on, but they weren't sharing everything. Why? What was it that they weren't telling her? She could see the same fear in their eyes that had been growing inside her since she'd entered this godforsaken town. Something was horribly wrong in Hollow Creek, and it wasn't just the beast. Evelyn, what do you mean? Claire's voice was sharp, demanding answers. What's going to happen to me? And why are you both acting like this is my fault? Evelyn's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in her gaze. Only pity. You don't understand, Claire. This isn't about blame. This is about survival. The curse is part of Hollow Creek's bloodline. It's not just the Blackwoods who are tied to it. The entire town is. The beast, the darkness. They feed on the town, and when one of us breaks the seal, we offer ourselves as a sacrifice. Claire's breath caught in her throat. A sacrifice? Yes, Evelyn said, nodding slowly. The Blackwoods bloodline had to offer themselves to keep the beast contained. And when the seal broke, well, you've already seen what's been unleashed. But there's more. This town has always been built on a balance, a pact between the people and the land. But that pact is fragile, and when it's broken, it can only be mended by someone willing to pay the price. Claire clenched her fists. You're telling me the entire town knew this? Everyone here. They knew. Evelyn's face twisted with an unreadable expression. Some knew, some suspected, but not everyone understood the cost of the pact. Not everyone realizes what happens when the seal is disturbed. When the Blackwoods disappeared, they thought it was over. But the curse, it doesn't die. It just waits. Henry finally spoke, his voice low and strained. The seal wasn't meant to be broken, Claire. But now that it has been, you're right. You can't just walk away. None of us can. Claire's eyes darted between them both, panic bubbling inside her chest. Then what am I supposed to do? You're telling me that I have to sacrifice myself to stop it. Henry grimaced, looking away. It's not just you. It's the town. It's the only way to ensure the creature doesn't destroy everything. There's another part to it. Another secret we haven't told you yet. Claire's heart sank. What secret? Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. The darkness that's been freed doesn't just want destruction. It wants to consume everything. And the only way to truly stop it is to destroy Hollow Creek itself. Claire froze. What are you saying? You want me to destroy the town? Henry's face twisted with a bitter kind of pain. We don't have a choice. The darkness isn't just going to stop at the cave. If we don't act now, if we don't destroy the town and everything it's built upon, it will spread. It will swallow the world whole. The sacrifice isn't just about sealing the creature back in. It's about eradicating everything tied to the curse. The town, the people, the land, all of it. Claire took a step back, her legs trembling as the weight of his words crashed over her. Destroy the town? Erase it all? But what about the people? Claire whispered, her throat dry. There are people here. Innocent people. What happens to them? Henry closed his eyes, guilt and sorrow written across his face. There are no innocents left, Claire. The curse has already spread through this town, through its bloodlines. No one is untouched by it. If you don't destroy the town, it will consume them. It will consume you. Evelyn stepped closer to Claire, her voice now a soft, almost pleading tone. We never wanted you to be part of this. We never wanted anyone to be a part of this. But the curse, it chooses its vessels. And now, you've been chosen. Claire was shaking now, her body on the edge of breaking. She didn't know who she was anymore, standing in that diner with the weight of an entire town's fate pressing down on her. How could she destroy everything she had just started to understand? How could she sacrifice herself? And them? Tell me what I need to do, Claire said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotion swirling inside her. If this was her fate, if she was truly the one to stop this madness, then she had to understand how. Tell me what I need to do to fix this. Henry looked at her, a dark sadness in his eyes. You'll need to go back to the cave, back to where it all started. That's where the heart of the curse lies. That's where you'll make the final choice. Back to the cave, Claire repeated, her voice hollow. And what happens when I get there? Henry and Evelyn exchanged a glance, one filled with uncertainty. You'll know when you get there, Evelyn said softly. The curse doesn't just take lives. It takes memories too. It will make you question everything, make you doubt your own mind. But you have to hold on, Claire. You have to do what's right. What's right? Claire whispered, fear creeping into her voice. How do I even know what that is anymore? Claire barely slept that night. She spent hours staring at the ceiling, her mind unable to quiet the cacophony of fear and doubt. The weight of her responsibility was like a stone pressing against her chest, suffocating her every breath. What choice did she have, though? Henry and Evelyn had been clear. The town was doomed unless she acted. She was the only one who could close the seal, and that meant she had to return to the cave. The darkness outside the diner window had grown deeper, colder. Hollow Creek felt like a town on the edge of oblivion, its secrets too powerful to ignore, its curse too old to break. Claire knew she had no choice but to go back. She couldn't stand the thought of the beast, or whatever that dark force was, continuing its rampage. But as the hours passed, she wondered whether the real horror was not the creature beneath, but the price of sealing it away. She pulled on her jacket, the fabric cold against her skin. Henry had told her that the heart of the curse lay deep in the cave, where the ancient seal was once placed. That was where it would end, where she would have to make the ultimate choice. There were no more distractions now, no more hesitation. She was leaving the diner, leaving Hollow Creek behind. But the closer she got to the cave, the more the town felt like it was pulling her back, its bones creaking under the pressure of secrets too old to bury. The path to the cave was treacherous. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy of trees, leaving Claire to navigate through the underbrush with only the sound of her footsteps for company. The forest seemed alive, pulsing with energy, as if the land itself was aware of her presence. It felt like the trees were watching her, their branches swaying like skeletal fingers. She reached the entrance to the cave before long. The air here was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and the sound of rushing water echoed in the distance. The cave was silent, as though it were waiting for her. Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The stone walls inside were slick with moisture, and the faint light from her flashlight barely illuminated the narrow passage ahead. It felt like she was descending into the earth's very bowels, into something that had been hidden for too long. As she walked deeper into the cave, Claire's thoughts became muddled. She could feel the weight of the town's history pressing against her. The dark force Henry and Evelyn had warned her about whispering in the air. She could hear it now, a soft, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She reached the inner chamber of the cave. It was vast, the ceiling towering above her, supported by stalactites that seemed like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. The ground was uneven, dotted with sharp rocks and deep crevices. But at the center of the chamber was a stone altar, its surface covered in strange markings that Claire didn't recognize. Her breath caught in her throat as she took a step closer to the altar. There, resting in the middle, was the heart of the curse, the the stone that had started it all. It was glowing faintly, an eerie, sickly green light that seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. The air around it felt charged, electric, as though something inside was alive, waiting for her touch. This is as Claire thought, her pulse racing. She could feel the energy in the room building, the walls pressing in around her, urging her to make a decision. But what choice did she really have? If she didn't do this, the creature would escape and the town would fall. But what if closing the seal meant sacrificing everything? What if there was no turning back? She extended a trembling hand toward the stone. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a violent jolt of energy shot through her body. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she thought she was going to lose consciousness. But instead, memories flooded her mind. Flashes of the town's past, the Blackwood family's rituals, the blood spilled to keep the seal intact. And then, something worse. The creature beneath the cave, the beast that Henry had described, it was not just a physical entity. It was a manifestation of all the town's darkest desires, its deepest fears. The creature had been born of the town's sins, a reflection of its very soul. As long as the town existed, the beast would exist. And as long as the beast existed, the curse would never be broken. The stone began to hum louder, and Claire stumbled backward, her mind reeling. She couldn't understand it all, but she felt it. The beast, the darkness, it wasn't something that could simply be locked away. It was part of the town, part of her. And as long as she tried to fight it, it would consume her. "You have to destroy it," a voice whispered in the darkness, the words coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was Henry's voice, but distorted, as if it were being filtered through. Time itself. Destroy the heart, Claire. Destroy the curse. But remember, nothing survives the cost. Claire's hand hovered over the stone. She could feel its pull, the weight of the decision pressing down on her like an iron hand. The creature was close now, just beyond the walls of the cave, waiting for her to make her choice. A sudden realization struck her. There was no sealing the curse anymore. The seal had already been broken. It was too late. All that was left was to end it, to erase the town, to erase everything tied to the beast. But could she do it? Could she truly destroy everything she had come to know, everything she had uncovered? There was only one way to know. With a deep breath, Claire closed her eyes and pressed her hand against the stone. And as the cave around her began to tremble, she felt the world shift beneath her feet. The moment Claire touched the stone, the cave seemed to come alive. The air thickened around her, oppressive and heavy with a strange energy. She could feel the pulse of the stone beneath her palm, vibrating with an otherworldly force that made her skin crawl. The walls trembled, and for a split second, she could swear the ground itself shifted beneath her. It was as though the very earth was alive, reacting to the act of her touch. For a brief moment, Claire felt her grip on reality slip. The edges of her vision blurred, as though she was no longer standing in the cave, but floating in some strange limbo between worlds. The sounds of the cave seemed muffled, distant, and her body felt weightless, as if she was being drawn into the stone itself. The curse, she thought, her mind flashing to the terrible realization she had just uncovered. The creature that had terrorized the town was more than just a physical entity. It was an extension of Hollow Creek itself, a part of the land, the blood, the history. As long as the town existed, the creature would be there, waiting, lurking, feeding off the darkness that the townspeople had allowed to fester. The pulse from the stone became more intense, as if the beast could sense her presence. The low hum that had been just a whisper grew louder, a deep, resonating thrum that reverberated through her chest. The shadows in the cave seemed to shift, swirling like living things. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as the realization hit her with full force. She wasn't just in a cave. She was inside the heart of the curse. Claire's grip tightened on the stone, her fingers pressing harder against its cool surface. She could feel the dark energy flowing through it, pouring into her. Visions filled her mind of the town's past, of the Blackwoods' rituals, of the blood spilled to maintain the seal. But there was more, something darker. Images of the beast, its many eyes, its gnashing teeth, its monstrous form that seemed to shift and morph with every passing second. It was a thing born of pain, of fear, of human suffering. It had always been there, waiting for its moment to escape. And now, that moment had arrived. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble violently, the walls of the cave groaning as though they were alive. Claire stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the creature stirring beneath the surface, the walls of the cave pulsating in time with its movements. A low growl filled the air, deep and guttural, like the sound of something waking after a long, restless sleep. It's here. The thought was enough to send a chill through her entire body. The cave seemed to be closing in around her, the darkness pressing in from all sides. But through the suffocating blackness, a faint glow caught her eye, something different, something unfamiliar. It was a small crack in the stone wall, radiating a strange, flickering light. The glow seemed to pull her in, calling her, urging her forward. Her feet moved on their own, as though her body was being guided by some unseen force. She approached the crack, her heart pounding as she reached out with trembling fingers. The moment her hand made contact with the crack, the light flared brightly, blinding her for a split second. And then nothing. The cave was still. A sudden, unbearable silence fell over the chamber. The tremors ceased. The creature's growl faded away, as if it had never existed in the first place. The walls, once alive with energy, were now still and unmoving. Claire stood frozen, her breath heavy in her chest. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she felt different. The air felt lighter, less oppressive, though there was a strange heaviness in her heart. The light from the crack in the wall had faded, leaving the cave in darkness once more. But something had changed, something fundamental. She glanced down at the stone altar, where the heart of the curse had once pulsed with a sickly light. It was now still dormant. The power that had filled the cave moments before had dissipated, leaving only the faintest traces behind. But as Claire stood there, a sense of unease began to creep over her once more. She had felt it, the connection, the link to the darkness. The creature hadn't been destroyed. It had been sealed again, yes, but only temporarily. The curse wasn't gone. It was still there, festering beneath the surface, waiting for its next opportunity. Claire's stomach twisted as the thoughts settled in her mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She had done what she could, but there were no easy answers. The creature was contained, at least for now, but the curse would live on. The town, the people would never be free of it, not until the land itself was cleansed. And Claire knew, deep down, that it wasn't just the town she had to save. It was the entire world. The beast beneath Hollow Creek wasn't just an isolated terror. It was part of something much larger, a corruption that reached into the very heart of humanity. And as long as the beast existed, as long as that darkness remained alive, there would be no escaping it. But Claire couldn't do it alone. She couldn't carry the weight of the curse on her own shoulders. She needed help. She needed to find those who were still fighting, those who had been left behind, those who understood what was at stake. With one last glance at the altar, she turned and made her way back toward the entrance of the cave. The shadows followed her, stretching long and dark across the walls, as if they were waiting for her to make the next move. And in the back of her mind, she could hear the whispering call of the beast. This isn't over. The walk back to Hollow Creek was long, too long for Claire's frayed nerves. The darkened forest seemed endless, the trees closing in around her with every step she took. It felt as though the very ground beneath her feet was shifting, as though it didn't want her to leave. The weight of the curse hung in the air like an unseen cloud, and Claire could feel it pressing in on her from all sides. She had thought she could leave it behind. The beast, the darkness, the secrets of Hollow Creek. But she was no fool. She knew the truth now. The creature beneath the town was a part of something far older, something far more dangerous than any of them had realized. And though the seal may have been closed for now, the threat was far from over. As she neared the outskirts of Hollow Creek, the town appeared in the distance, bathed in the dim light of the early morning. It seemed peaceful, almost idyllic, but Claire knew better. The shadows that had followed her in the cave still lingered, haunting her thoughts, reminding her that nothing in Hollow Creek was as it seemed. The streets were eerily empty as she walked through the town, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the buildings. It was as if the town had been abandoned, its people too afraid to leave their homes. Or perhaps they had all felt the shift in the air, the sense of impending doom that now lingered like a thick fog. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She reached the diner, the familiar neon sign flickering weakly above the door. Inside, the low murmur of voices told her that the town hadn't completely given in to its fear. But as she stepped through the door, the room fell silent. Henry and Evelyn were sitting at a booth in the back, their eyes meeting hers as she entered. Their faces were grim, their expressions unreadable. Claire didn't wait for an invitation. She walked over to the booth and sat down across from them, her body exhausted from the long trek. She was tempted to pour herself a cup of coffee, but the thought of anything hot made her stomach churn. "So, it's done?" Henry asked, his voice low but steady. Claire nodded, though she could feel the doubt gnawing at her. "It's done for now. The seal's closed. But it's not over. The beast is still out there waiting. It's part of this place, part of everything." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes dark with concern. "What do you mean, part of everything? I thought sealing it away would stop it." Claire shook her head slowly. "It's not that simple. It's a manifestation of the darkness that's always been here. It's the curse of the town, tied to its very foundation. Even if the beast is sealed, that darkness remains. It feeds on fear, on suffering, on the secrets buried in Hollow Creek's past. And as long as that's true, the creature will never truly be gone." Henry was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "So, we've only delayed the inevitable?" "Exactly," Claire said softly. "We bought some time, but the price is higher than any of us imagined. The town is built on blood, on sacrifice. And as long as it stands, the curse will persist. Then we need to destroy the town," Evelyn said, her voice cold, decisive. "Burn it all down. Erase the source of the curse. Leave nothing behind." Claire felt a shiver run through her at her words. "You can't just burn it all down. It's not that simple. The curse, it's in the land itself. Destroying the town might only make things worse. We need to find a way to cleanse it, to break the cycle." Henry looked at Claire with a mixture of weariness and understanding. "You're right. There's no easy solution, but there's still hope. We have to find a way to sever the connection to the beast once and for all." Claire nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "I don't know how to fix this. I've done all I can." Evelyn leaned back in the booth, her arms crossed. "You said the beast is tied to the town's history, right? To the Blackwoods rituals? Then maybe that's where we need to start. If we can learn more about those rituals, maybe we can find a way to destroy the beast at its source." Claire felt a flicker of hope. Evelyn was right. If they could uncover the truth behind the Blackwoods and their rituals, perhaps there was a way to put an end to the curse once and for all. But even as that thought took root, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The room grew colder, and Claire noticed the flickering of the diner's neon sign once again. It seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, an unsettling rhythm that set her teeth on edge. "You've seen the beast, haven't you?" Evelyn asked quietly, her eyes narrowing. "You've felt it, haven't you?" Claire swallowed hard. "I felt its presence, yes, but I haven't seen it, at least not fully." "You're lying," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. "You know what it looks like. You know what it can do. It's in your blood now, Claire, and it's going to come for you." Henry looked from Claire to Evelyn, his expression confused. "What's she talking about?" Claire's stomach twisted, and for the first time, she felt truly afraid. She had always known there was something off about Evelyn, something too knowing, too calculating. But now, that feeling was more pronounced than ever. Evelyn had been here, in Hollow Creek, far longer than either she or Henry had realized. She was part of the town's twisted fabric, woven into the darkness that had always lingered beneath the surface. The beast was still out there, and now it wasn't just in the town, it was in her. The words echoed in Claire's head, a relentless drumbeat. It's in your blood now. She couldn't push them away. Evelyn's gaze had been too intense, too knowing, and Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was seeing something inside her that she hadn't even fully realized yet. She wanted to deny it, to scream that Evelyn was wrong, but deep down, a part of her knew that Evelyn was right. Something had changed. The connection to the beast, to the darkness that had haunted Hollow Creek for centuries, had burrowed into her very soul. "You're wrong," Claire said, her voice tight, almost pleading. I haven't seen it. I haven't felt it like you think. I've only what?" Evelyn's voice was soft now, almost pitying. "You're lying to yourself. You felt it when you touched the stone, didn't you? The same pulse that the beast feels, the same hunger. It's calling you, Claire. It's already inside you." Claire recoiled, a sudden surge of panic threatening to choke her. "No, it's not. I stopped it. I closed the seal." Henry's face was etched with concern, his eyes darting back and forth between Claire and Evelyn. He leaned forward slowly, as if testing the waters. "What's going on, Claire? What's really happening?" Claire felt her chest tighten as the weight of the truth pressed down on her. I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But something happened when I touched that stone in the cave. It was like the beast was right there in the room with me. I thought I was sealing it, but maybe I just woke it up." Evelyn's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. "Woke it up? No, Claire. It's always been awake, and it's awake in you now. The beast is tied to the land, to the bloodline of Hollow Creek, and now it has a piece of you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire's breath hitched in her throat. She didn't want to believe it, but everything inside her was telling her it was true. There was no escape. The beast had been dormant, yes, but it was far from dead. "We have to go to the source," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "The Blackwoods rituals, those are the key. We need to learn everything we can about them. Only then will we know how to finally destroy the beast." Claire nodded slowly, though the prospect of facing whatever darkness the Blackwoods had left behind filled her with dread. She couldn't do this alone. But what choice did she have? As the three of them stood and left the diner, Claire couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder. The neon sign flickered again, as if to signal that the past, the curse, and the creature itself were all waiting just beyond the veil. The walk to the library was silent. The streets of Hollow Creek were strangely quiet, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Claire felt the oppressive weight of the curse lingering in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as if the entire town was standing at the edge of a precipice, and any moment, they would all be dragged down into the abyss. When they reached the library, the door was locked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She pulled a key from her pocket and opened the door with practiced ease. The library was a small, dusty place, filled with old books and yellowed pages. Claire hadn't been inside since she was a child, but the air here felt different now. It felt heavy with secrets. Evelyn led them to the back of the library, where an old leather-bound book sat on a pedestal. It was ancient, the pages cracked and worn, as if it had been handled by many hands over the years. Claire approached it cautiously, her heart racing as she laid her hands on the cover. "This," Evelyn said quietly, "is where it all began. The Blackwoods' history, their rituals. This is the book they used to summon the beast." Claire opened the book with trembling fingers. The pages were filled with strange symbols, faded ink, and unsettling illustrations. As she flipped through the pages, one image caught her eye, a large, monstrous figure, its eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. It was the creature, the same one she had felt in the cave. But this was different. This wasn't just an illustration. This was a depiction of the creature's true form, of the curse in all its terrible glory. "Do you understand now?" Evelyn's voice was soft, almost reverent. "The beast is not a creature of flesh and bone. It's an entity, a force, It was created through the Blackwood's rituals, a binding of life and death. And now, it's bound to you. Claire's head spun. The weight of what she was reading threatened to crush her. The beast, the curse, it wasn't something she could fight with strength or courage alone. It was something far older, far more powerful. Something tied to the very land, the very blood that flowed through the town's veins. Her mind raced, and the faint, distant sound of growling echoed in her ears. A low, guttural sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth itself. Claire snapped her head up, her heart skipping a beat. "It's here," she whispered. Evelyn smiled a thin, cold smile. "No, it's inside you." The room seemed to close in on Claire as Evelyn's words lingered in the air. "It's inside you." She repeated it in her mind, like a haunting refrain that wouldn't go away. The growling, faint at first, was now growing louder in her ears. It wasn't just the echoes of some distant creature. It felt like it was coming from within her, an unholy vibration that spread through her bones and into her very soul. Henry looked at Claire with concern, his brows furrowed. "What's happening?" he asked. His voice was strained, as though he could sense it too, the sudden shift in the air, the palpable tension that had filled the room. I don't know," Claire stammered. She gripped the leather-bound book tightly, her knuckles white as she held onto it. It was a lifeline, something solid in the midst of the storm she was trapped in. But it wasn't enough. Nothing felt solid. "It's like it's calling to me." Evelyn's eyes glinted in the dim light of the library, something almost pleased flickering beneath the surface. "The beast is drawn to fear, Claire. It feeds on it, and it grows stronger the more you deny it. The more you fight it, the more it will take from you. It's why you've been so restless, so unsettled. It's already inside you, trying to find its way out." Claire's breath quickened. The growling grew louder, and now she could hear whispers too, scratching at the edges of her consciousness, like a voice in the back of her mind, urging her to let go, to embrace it. "No," she shook her head, backing away from the book, from Evelyn's knowing gaze. "I won't let it control me. I won't let it win." Henry took a step forward, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Claire, you have to listen. If this thing is really inside you, it's not something you can just ignore. We need to figure out what the Blackwoods did, how they sealed it before..." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes flicking to the book in Claire's hands. There was something in his expression, something like recognition, fear. She followed his gaze and felt a cold chill stealing through her bones. The creature, its image, was still in the book. But there was something else now. A symbol on the page was glowing faintly, pulsing with a sickly green light. Evelyn, too, noticed it at the same moment. Her lips parted in an almost inaudible gasp. "No, it's reacting to you, Claire. The seal, it's weakening." Claire's heart thudded in her chest. She tried to move away from the book, but her hands seemed unwilling to let go. The symbol on the page flared brighter, and for a moment, she felt a sharp, burning pain in her skull, like something was clawing its way out of her mind. "Claire!" Henry's voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "Let go of the book." She couldn't. The sensation of something crawling beneath her skin was overwhelming. The whispers in her mind were louder now, a cacophony of growls and guttural sounds, each one urging her to do things she didn't understand, to embrace it, embrace the power. The thought was not her own, but it felt so real, so alive in her mind. It was as though the beast itself was speaking to her, guiding her, and promising her strength. Her vision blurred. She could feel the weight of the curse settling deeper into her, threading itself through her body like a second heartbeat. The book burned in her hands. It felt as though her very soul was being torn open. "No!" Claire whispered, choking on the words. She dropped the book, the sound of it hitting the floor loud in the silence that followed. The growling and whispers in her mind did not cease. They grew louder. Henry rushed to her side, but when his hand touched her shoulder, a violent shock of energy shot through her. The force knocked him back, and he hit the bookshelf with a heavy thud. Claire cried out, but the sound was lost beneath the growing roar in her head. It wasn't just in her mind anymore. The walls of the library seemed to ripple, as though the very fabric of the world was warping around her. Claire could feel the creature, the beast, stirring within her, pushing against the boundaries of her consciousness. The darkness, the curse, was claiming her. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her expression unreadable. It's already too late for you, Claire. The moment you touched that stone, you gave yourself over to it. You are the beast now. No! Claire screamed, her voice torn and raw. She clutched her head, feeling her thoughts slipping through her fingers like sand. I won't let it win. Evelyn's smile was almost sympathetic. It's not about winning or losing. The beast is a part of you. You can't escape it. You never could. Claire fought against the pull, but it was like swimming against a current far stronger than she could ever hope to overcome. The roar in her ears, the visions of the creature, it haunted her, threatened to swallow her whole. She could feel her strength slipping away. Henry, groaning as he stood, stumbled toward her. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We'll find a way to help you. We can still fix this." But Claire wasn't sure she believed him anymore. The beast had planted its claws deep inside her, and every part of her felt it. She could feel its hunger, its primal, insatiable need. "You can't fix this," she whispered. "It's inside me, and soon, it'll be inside you too." The words left her lips like a curse. Her own voice sounded strange, distorted, as though the beast itself was speaking through her. And as she looked at Henry, she saw the same fear mirrored in his eyes. Evelyn's smile widened, pleased at the reaction. For the first time, Claire realized just how much danger they were all in. The beast beneath Hollow Creek wasn't just a monster. It was a curse, a force that could take on many shapes. And now, it had found a way to grow stronger. The seal may have been broken, but there was no way to put it back. The only question now was, who would survive when the beast finally emerged? Claire could feel the weight of the beast inside her. It wasn't just a presence anymore, it was becoming her. Every heartbeat thudded louder in her chest, each pulse a reminder of its power, its hunger. It was as if her own flesh was rebelling, twisting, reshaping to accommodate it. The raw energy churned within her, hungry and restless. She felt the walls of the library closing in, the room spinning around her. The library's musty smell, the faint rustling of pages, all of it blurred in the haze. And through it all, the growling, the whispers, they had become a part of her, entwining with her very thoughts. "No," Claire breathed, her hands shaking at her sides as she struggled to steady herself. She tried to focus, but the pull of the beast was too strong. The thing inside her was growing, expanding, spreading into her mind, her body. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. The air in her lungs felt thick, suffocating, as though it was being sucked out by the force that was taking over. Henry's voice broke through the fog. "Claire, listen to me." He moved toward her slowly, carefully, as if afraid that the moment he got too close, she would collapse under the weight of whatever was happening. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and concern. "Don't let it win," he pleaded. "We'll figure this out. We can still find a way." But Claire wasn't sure she had it in her to fight anymore. She wasn't sure she wanted to fight. Evelyn, standing just a few paces behind Henry, watched with cold, detached interest. There was no pity in her eyes, no compassion. She was a woman who understood the curse, the force, far too well. And Claire, standing on the edge of her sanity, was little more than another casualty to her. "It's already inside her, Evelyn," Henry said, his voice trembling. "What do we do now? We can't just leave her like this." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Claire, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're right. There's nothing you can do for her now. The beast has chosen her. She's its vessel." Claire felt a surge of anger, deep and primal, flicker inside her. Vessel? She wasn't some empty shell for this thing to fill. She wasn't going to let it take over. Not without a fight. But the beast wasn't giving her a choice. With a cry of frustration, Claire staggered backward, her hands grabbing at her head as if trying to physically hold herself together. It felt like the walls were pressing in on her. She could feel the beast, like claws scraping along the edges of her mind. It wanted out. It wanted freedom. She had to fight it. She had to fight it. But how? Her mind raced, frantic and desperate. The Blackwoods rituals. The book. She had to know what they had done to contain the creature, to understand how they had sealed it away. The beast had been trapped once before, hadn't it? Suddenly, the library's shelves seemed to close in on her, the books fading into the shadows. Her eyes locked onto the ancient tome, the one Evelyn had opened earlier. Her breath hitched in her throat as she realized what she had to do. "Claire, no!" Henry shouted, but it was too late. She was already moving toward the book. It was a strange, impossible urge. She couldn't stop herself. She grabbed the book, pulling it off the pedestal. Her hands trembled as she flipped the pages, the strange symbols flashing before her eyes. The growling in her mind grew louder, more insistent, but she ignored it. She had to understand. She had to find the answer. The pages flipped with a life of their own, and then she found it. The ritual. The one that the Blackwoods had used to seal the beast away. "Wait, stop!" Evelyn's voice was urgent now. "That's dangerous. You can't." But Claire was already reading. She could hear the beast screaming in the back of her mind, thrashing in its prison. But she focused on the words in front of her. The symbols seemed to pulse with energy, glowing faintly in the dim light of the library. She had found the key. The ritual could reverse the curse, reverse the connection. But it came at a cost. The words seemed to blur as the runes spun around her again. Her mind was stretched to its breaking point. She had to do it. She had to seal the beast away, even if it meant losing herself in the process. "I don't care," Claire whispered to herself, her voice shaking. "I can't let it out. I can't let it win." With a final, trembling breath, Claire began to speak the words of the ritual. The air in the room thickened, the walls creaking as if the very building itself was protesting the ritual's power. Henry shouted her name, but Claire's voice drowned him out, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, a deep, rumbling sound vibrating through the air. She felt the beast within her roar in fury, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Evelyn, watching with wide eyes, took a cautious step back. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The beast will destroy you. You can't." But Claire didn't hear her. She was already too far gone. A brilliant light exploded from the book in Claire's hands, blinding and hot. It filled the room, burning everything around her. Claire's scream echoed through the library, a sound of pure agony, as the energy coursed through her body. The beast thrashed, howling in pain and rage. And then, for a moment, there was silence. Claire collapsed to the floor, the book slipping from her hands. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling with exhaustion. For the briefest of moments, she thought it was over. She had done it. She had sealed the beast away. But when she opened her eyes, she realized the truth. The beast was still inside her. The connection hadn't been broken. It had merely changed, and now, the true battle was about to begin. Claire's eyes flickered open, heavy with exhaustion, her body stiff from the ritual's toll. She could feel every muscle, every joint, aching as though they had been stretched to their breaking point. But it was the sensation inside her that terrified her the most. The beast. It was still there. It had never left. Its presence in her mind, in her body, was like a shadow that stretched deeper, darker, and far more insidious. Her breath hitched as the memory of the blinding light surged to the forefront of her mind. The ritual had hurt. She had felt the power of it tear through her, ripping the beast out of the depths of her soul, or so she had hoped. But now, as she lay on the cold stone floor of the library, gasping for breath, Claire understood that the ritual had only severed the connection temporarily. The beast had been trapped once, but this time, it was different. It was inside her, and it had no intention of leaving. The air in the library was still thick with the remnants of the ritual's energy, the lingering hum of magic heavy in the room. The faint glow from the book that had once pulsed with energy now lay dim and lifeless, its pages curling with age. "Claire," a voice broke through her thoughts, soft concern. She turned her head slowly, blinking as Henry knelt beside her. His face was etched with worry, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her shoulder. "Are you okay? What happened? Where is it?" She swallowed hard, struggling to form the words. It was like trying to speak underwater. "It's still here," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's inside me." "No," Henry whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be. You were supposed to seal it away." His voice cracked. "You were supposed to be free." Her gaze turned away from his, her eyes haunted. The weight of the truth pressed on her chest, suffocating her. She had failed. She had believed the ritual would be enough to rid her of the beast. But now, she realized the true horror was far worse than she had imagined. Evelyn, who had been silent up until now, moved forward with calculated steps. Her face was unreadable, but there was an unmistakable sense of grim satisfaction in her eyes. She crouched down beside Claire, her voice low but steady. "The beast isn't something that can be sealed away, Claire. It's part of you now. It's always been part of you." Claire's heart sank. "What do you mean? I thought..." Evelyn's eyes darkened. The Blackwoods didn't just seal it away. They tamed it. They made it a part of their legacy. They allowed it to be a force they could control, not something that could be defeated. That's what you were meant to do, to control it. Control it. Claire scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I can barely keep it from tearing me apart. And you want me to control it?" Evelyn studied her with an almost clinical detachment. "The beast is more than just a creature. It is a force of nature, a being of pure power. And you, Claire, are its chosen vessel. You may think you're struggling, but in truth, it's already made its mark on you." Claire's breath quickened. The thought of the creature taking root inside her, becoming part of her very being, made her feel sick. She could feel its presence, its hunger, coiling deeper within her mind. It wasn't just a passing phase. It was changing her. She was becoming something else. Something more. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. She didn't want to know the answer, but she had to hear it. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Now, you become the beast." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She could feel the beast stir inside her, as though it had been waiting for permission to rise. A growl, low and primal, vibrated in her chest. The power thrummed through her veins, dark and potent, threatening to tear free from the confines of her body. "No," Claire gasped, clutching at her head. She could feel it, a pressure building inside her skull, like her mind was being stretched to its breaking point. I can't do this." Henry's hand was suddenly on her arm, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll find another way," he said, his voice a promise. "We can fix this, Claire. We will. I won't let you become something you're not." But Claire wasn't so sure anymore. The beast inside her was too strong, too alive. She had felt its power surge through her once before, during the ritual. But now it was something else entirely. It was calling to her, urging her to embrace it, to let it take over. The temptation was real. The power was intoxicating, and every instinct in her screamed to give in. "Let go," the beast whispered, its voice soft and seductive. "Let me take over. I can give you everything you've ever wanted." Her chest tightened, the weight of the choice pressing down on her. The thought of giving in, of becoming something greater, of wielding the power the beast promised, was almost too much to resist. But deep down, she knew the truth. If she gave in, she would lose herself. She would be consumed by the darkness, and the world around her would suffer for it. Henry was still there, his voice grounding her, but even his presence couldn't drown out the beast's call. She felt its claws digging deeper into her soul, its hunger rising. "You can't fight it forever," Evelyn said softly. "Eventually, you'll accept it. You'll see that it's the only way." Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears, her heart racing. "No!" The word came out strained, desperate. "I won't let it take me. I won't let it destroy everything I care about." She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her chest, trying to push the dark presence back. She could feel it pushing against her skin, threatening to break through, but she refused to let it. Not yet, but as she struggled to hold on to herself, she realized with a sickening certainty that the battle wasn't just for her body. It was for her very soul, and no matter how hard she fought, the beast was always one step ahead. In that moment, Claire understood the true horror of what she was facing. The beast wasn't just a monster, it was her future. It was her destiny, and there was no escaping it. Claire's mind raced, her body shaking with the force of the internal battle that raged within her. Every breath felt like it was pulling her deeper into the abyss, deeper into the dark void where the beast lived. It was more than a part of her now. It had become her, a shadow that clung to her every move, her every thought. But there was still a flicker of defiance in her, a spark of resistance that refused to go out. Henry's voice reached her again, soft but insistent. Claire, you can't let it win. You're stronger than this. You've been fighting it for so long. You don't have to give in now. But Claire wasn't sure she could hold on anymore. She felt the beast pushing against her ribs, trying to break free, trying to make her feel its rage. It was becoming harder and harder to think clearly, to focus on Henry's words. The beast's whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and they were slowly drowning out everything else. Let me take over, the voice said, sweet and persuasive. You're so tired, Claire. So weak. I can give you the strength you need. I can make them all see you for what you truly are. She clenched her fists, digging her nails into her palms to try and steady herself. I'm not you, she thought, the words echoing in her mind. I won't be you. But even as she thought it, the beast's power surged inside her like a living thing, rumming in her chest, in her veins. It was alive, and it wanted out. It wanted to be free. A growl rumbled deep in her throat, involuntary, as though the beast was trying to make its presence known, trying to take control of her body. Claire could feel her muscles tensing, her fingers curling, as the energy that had once been her own began to feel alien. Let go, Claire, the beast purred again. You can't fight me forever. We're one now. You don't have to struggle anymore. I can make all your pain disappear, all your doubts, all your fears. No, Claire gasped, shaking her head violently. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to hold the pieces of herself together. No, I won't let you. The beast screamed inside her, a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath her feet. She felt the energy rip through her like a violent storm. It wasn't just in her mind anymore. It was inside her very body, twisting her, pulling her limbs into unnatural positions, forcing her to move as it willed. Henry stepped forward, his hands reaching for her. Claire, fight it! His voice was frantic, pleading. You have to fight it! Claire's breath hitched as the beast surged again, stronger now, its power almost suffocating. It felt as if it was seeping into her very bones, drowning her from the inside. I can't, she whispered, barely able to speak through the weight of it. It's too strong. It's taking me. Evelyn's cold voice sliced through the air. It's not taking you, Claire. It's awakening you. You've always had it inside you. You're just finally realizing what you are. Claire turned her head sharply toward her, eyes wild. What are you talking about? Her voice was strained, her body trembling with the effort to stay in control. What do you mean, what I am? Evelyn's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold satisfaction. You're more than just a victim, Claire. You're the successor, the one chosen to carry the beast's legacy. You were always meant to wield this power. Power, the beast whispered again, but this time it wasn't a sweet temptation. It was a command. Take it, Claire. Take what's yours. Claire's vision blurred, the edges of her sight darkening as the creature's power flooded her. She couldn't fight it anymore. She could feel it coursing through her hands trembling as she lifted them before her, as though reaching for something she didn't fully understand. The beast inside her raged, demanding, and Claire could feel her body shaking with the weight of the transformation. Her fingers cracked, the sound sharp in the air, and her skin began to ripple as the beast forced its way through. Her veins glowed with a dark, pulsing energy, and her senses heightened, sharper than they had ever been before. "No!" Claire whispered through clenched teeth, her voice barely recognizable. "I don't want this." But it didn't matter. The beast was too strong. Her will to fight was fading, and the hunger inside her grew. With one final scream, Claire's body convulsed as the transformation took full hold. Her eyes glowed with the same feral light that had haunted her dreams. Her limbs elongated, twisting unnaturally, and claws began to form at the tips of her fingers. Henry stepped back in horror, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Claire! No, no!" His voice cracked as he reached out toward her, but she was no longer the woman he had known. She was something else now, something darker, something more. The beast inside her roared, and Claire, in that instant, understood. She understood that it was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for control. She had become the monster she feared. But deep inside her, buried beneath the hunger and the rage, there was still a flicker of Claire, the girl who had once fought to be free, who had once loved, once believed in hope. Could she still find her way back? Or had the beast consumed her completely? The answer was slipping away, fading faster than she could grasp it. But one thing was clear. The beast was here to stay. The transformation was complete. Claire could feel it in every fiber of her being, her bones aching with a new, terrifying strength. She was no longer just a woman. She was a creature of fury, a vessel for something far older and more powerful than she could ever comprehend. The hunger clawed at her insides, gnawing at her sanity, demanding that she give in. But in the dark corners of her mind, a tiny spark of the person she had once been remained. It flickered weakly, struggling to hold on as the beast's influence surged through her. Claire's hands curled into claws, the sharp tips of her nails scraping against the stone floor. Her eyes burned with a blinding, unnatural glow. The transformation had been painful, every bone, every muscle reshaping itself, but now she was stronger, faster. The power was intoxicating, and for a brief moment, she reveled in it. The beast within her felt like freedom, like a promise of everything she had ever wanted. But then the realization struck. The thing she had become, the thing she had feared, was now in control. Her head snapped toward Henry, his face stricken with fear as he backed away slowly. He hadn't seen this side of her. He hadn't seen the monster she could become. "Claire!" His voice trembled, barely above a whisper. He reached out a hand, as though trying to bridge the gap between them. "It's still you, right? You're still. You." Claire's heart shattered at his words, but it was buried beneath the roar of the beast. The creature's voice inside her was like an echo, reverberating through her mind. "Don't listen to him, Claire. You're more than what you were. You are power. You are freedom. You are everything." But Claire's eyes softened for a moment, and she stepped toward him, her movements slow, unsure. "Henry, please, But before she could finish, the beast took over. Her body jerked, her hands swiping through the air, claws slicing through the space between them. Henry's eyes widened in terror as he scrambled back, just out of reach, but the movement was too fast. The beast was in control now. Her limbs extended, her muscles coiling. Her limbs extended, her muscles coiling like a predator ready to strike. Henry's gaze shifted to the door behind her, his escape route, but the monster within her wasn't going to let him go that easily. Her eyes locked on him, and for a moment, there was nothing but a wild, primal hunger. And then it spoke. "Run." The voice was not Claire's. It was deep, guttural, and dark. The beast's voice. But somehow, it still sounded like Claire, almost as if it was speaking through her. Henry froze. A part of him wanted to run, to flee for his life, but another part of him, something deeper, something he couldn't explain, wanted to stay. He wanted to reach her, to pull her back from the edge. But the air in the room had thickened, charged with an unnatural energy. and it was clear that Claire, the beast, had made her choice. "Run, Henry," the voice growled again. It was a command, but this time it carried a trace of desperation, as if even the beast itself knew that the moment of control was slipping away. Henry, trembling, took a step back. "I won't leave you, Claire," he said, his voice hoarse, but the resolve in his words faltered. "We'll fix this. We can still." But the beast cut him off with a deafening roar that shook the very foundation of the room. The sound echoed through the walls, raw and primal. And just like that, the beast lunged. Henry barely had time to react as Claire's claws slashed the air between them, her body moving with a speed that felt like a blur. Her claws missed by mere inches, raking across the stone floor, but the force of the blow sent a shockwave through the air, knocking Henry off balance. In that brief moment, Claire felt it, the flicker of herself beneath the beast's control. She saw Henry, heard his desperate cry, and knew he was not just running. He was trying to reach her. But before she could act, the hunger within her surged, swallowing her thoughts, drowning out the voice of reason that had once been her own. She felt the urge to rip and tear, to end it all, to embrace the darkness. But in the deepest part of her, she heard a voice, her voice, faint but resolute. "Don't. Fight it, Claire. You're stronger than this." The beast didn't want her to fight. It wanted her to submit. But there, in the deepest recesses of her mind, Claire clung to that fragile, fleeting piece of herself. The woman she had once been. The woman who had loved, who had fought for something greater. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and the roar of the beast began to soften, just for a moment. But it wasn't enough. The power of the creature inside her still clung to every part of her, twisting her thoughts, forcing her into submission. "You belong to me now." Claire's vision began to swim. Her claws dug into the stone floor, and her muscles coiled like a spring. She could feel herself slipping, losing ground. But deep down, Claire knew that if she didn't act soon, if she didn't find a way to regain control, she might never be herself again. The room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, vibrating in time with the beating of her heart. Every breath Claire took was a battle, every movement a struggle between the woman she used to be and the monstrous entity clawing its way out of her. The beast raged inside her, a tempest of fury and hunger, its voice a constant, maddening whisper that drowned out everything else. "Let go, Claire. Let me out." Her fingers twitched, claws digging into the stone floor as her vision blurred. Her thoughts were fractured, like shards of glass, and she struggled to hold onto any semblance of control. But the beast's pull was strong, its power growing with every passing second. Henry was still there, though he was at the far end of the room now, his back pressed against the wall. His chest was heaving as he tried to catch his breath, eyes wide with terror. He knew she was slipping away, and the fear in his gaze tore at Claire's already shattered heart. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said, his voice trembling, his hand outstretched as though trying to reach her. "But I can't just watch you destroy yourself." There was a finality in his tone, an acceptance that struck Claire like a physical blow. He was ready to leave. He was ready to give up on her. "No," the beast snarled. "We don't need him. We are stronger without him. You don't need anyone but me." Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She could feel the heat radiating off her body, a sickening warmth that was both alien and terrifying. Her muscles burned as the transformation surged again, pushing her towards something darker, more primal. "Henry," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, don't leave me." But it wasn't just the words that reached him. It was the fleeting glimmer of humanity in her eyes, the brief moment of recognition that pierced through the darkness. It was the last shred of the person she had been, the woman he had loved. For a moment, Henry hesitated. His hand dropped to his side, and he took a slow step forward. "Claire, fight it," he urged, his voice softening. "I know you're still in there. I know you're still you. You can fight this." But the beast wasn't going to let her fight much longer. Claire's vision was fading, replaced by an overwhelming surge of power. The beast's presence was suffocating, its hunger too great to ignore. She felt herself being pulled under, drowning in. Its depths, the lines between who she was and what she was becoming blurred, and she was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. "You're mine now," the beast whispered, its voice low and sinister. "We are one. We'll tear him apart. Tear everyone apart. We are unstoppable." Henry took another step closer, but the movement was enough to trigger something within Claire. A primal growl ripped from her throat, a sound that wasn't her own. Her body lunged forward before she could stop herself, her claws slashing through the air with deadly speed. Henry's eyes widened in horror as he barely dodged the strike. "Claire, no!" His voice was frantic, pleading, but the words only fueled the beast's rage. She barely registered the force of the impact as her claws scraped across the stone, but the animal within her was too far gone. The hunger, the violence, it was all consuming now, and Henry, in his desperation to save her, had pushed her further away from the woman she had been. "You're too weak to fight this," the beast snarled. "You've always been weak, Claire. Let me take over. Let me show you what true power feels like." And in that moment, Claire wanted to give in. It would be easier, wouldn't it, to let go of the constant battle, to stop fighting the force that had taken root inside her. The beast had promised her power. It had promised her freedom. But Henry's words echoed in her mind. "You can fight this, Claire. I know you're still in there." And just as the beast tried to fully claim her, just as it prepared to tear Henry apart with her own hands, Claire found something deep within her, a flicker of resistance, a last vestige of herself. "No," she whispered, though her voice was shaky, strained. "I won't let you win." The beast howled in fury, a deafening scream that rattled her very bones. It was the loudest, most violent cry yet, but in the chaos, Claire felt something inside her snap back into place. It was small, but it was enough. With all the strength she could muster, she forced herself to move, pushing the beast's influence back with a fierce cry of her own. Her claws retracted, her body slumping slightly as the pull of the darkness weakened, just for a moment. Henry took another step toward her, his face filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Claire, you're still you. You can still fight this." The beast roared in fury, but Claire, trembling and gasping for air, managed to meet his gaze. "I don't know how much longer I can hold it off," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I won't. Let it take everything." Henry nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "I won't leave you. We'll figure this out together." But as the words left his mouth, the room seemed to tremble, and the darkness in Claire's mind began to rise again, stronger than before. The beast was angry, more relentless than ever, and it wasn't going to let her hold on for much longer. The question hung in the air like a deadly promise. Could Claire really hold onto the fragile thread of humanity inside her, or would the beast beneath consume her completely? Claire's breath came in ragged gasps, her chest heaving with each inhale. The beast raged within her, a constant, oppressive weight pressing against her thoughts. It was everywhere, its anger, its hunger, its relentless demand for control. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as if the very space were a cage, trapping her in the midst of this internal war. She glanced at Henry, his face a mask of concern and fear. He wasn't just watching her struggle anymore. He was actively trying to help her, reaching out with a hand, as though that touch could pull her back from the brink. She had always wondered how much he truly understood, how much he was willing to sacrifice. But now, as the beast roared in her mind, she was beginning to question whether her own love for him was enough to hold on. "You cannot fight me, Claire." The beast's voice was deeper now, more insistent, filled with wrath. "You will fall just like everyone else. Everyone you've ever cared about will fall, and I will be the one to tear them apart." She shook her head, trying to block out the voice, but it slithered through every crack in her defenses, every weakness she had. She could feel the shift in her body, a twitch in her muscles, as though they were about to snap into something inhuman. Her claws were slowly extending, the sharp tips cutting through the air with an unsettling hiss. Don't let me go, Henry's voice pleaded, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if it were being drowned out by the beast's insatiable roar. She wanted to reach him. She wanted to hold on to him, to remind herself that there was still something worth saving. But the hunger gnawed at her, the primal instincts growing stronger. She could smell the blood in the air, the fear radiating off Henry. It made her mouth water, her stomach clench in hunger. "Claire!" Henry shouted, desperation lacing his voice. "You're stronger than this? Don't let it take you." His words echoed in her mind, but they were fading, swallowed by the beast's overwhelming presence. She was losing the fight, slipping further into the abyss, and the beast knew it. "I am everything. You are nothing." A roar erupted from her throat, too loud and too guttural to be human. Her body jerked forward, but then something deep within her flickered. A memory. Her mother's face, smiling at her, the warmth of her touch, the safety of her embrace. Her heart stuttered, a brief but powerful surge of emotion pushing through the chaos. Claire's fingers twitched, claws retracting as the memory solidified, anchoring her in a moment of clarity. "No, I will not become this." She whispered it to herself, the words almost lost in the howl of the beast, but they were there, pulling her back. She could still fight. Henry's face was filled with an urgent plea, his hand reaching toward her. His fingers brushed against her skin, and in that instant, she felt the last thread of her humanity, fragile and delicate, flicker. "I love you, Claire," Henry said softly, his voice trembling. "You're not a monster. You never were." Tears welled in Claire's eyes as the beast screamed in rage, its fury clawing at her from the inside. The world around her spun, the edges of her vision growing darker, and for a split second, Claire thought she might lose herself entirely. But then something snapped. With a scream of her own, Claire shoved the beast aside, her will fighting back against the monstrous force that sought to dominate her. Her entire body trembled, her mind a battlefield of competing desires. One part of her begging for the release of giving in, while another screamed for survival. In that moment, it felt like time stood still. Claire's breath caught in her throat, her vision blurring as her heart raced. She had one chance, one fleeting moment to break free. With a raw, guttural cry, Claire fought through the darkness, the beast's presence surging violently against her. She could feel its claws digging into her very soul, threatening to rip her apart. "You cannot win," the beast growled. "You are mine." But Claire refused to listen. She had to fight. For herself. For Henry. The memories of her past flooded her. Images of her childhood, of her mother's warmth, of her love for Henry. These were the things that grounded her, that made her human. Her body shuddered with the effort, and for a moment, the beast faltered. Just a moment, but it was enough. "I will not be you," Claire whispered fiercely, her voice shaky but resolute. "I will not give in." A final, agonizing roar echoed through her body as the beast tried to fight back, but Claire pushed harder, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. Her body burned, her mind screamed, but she would not let it win. With a sudden, explosive force, Claire surged forward, breaking free from the beast's grip. She collapsed to the floor, trembling, her body slick with sweat. Her claws were gone, her skin pale and raw, but the beast had retreated for now. Henry was kneeling beside her in an instant, his hands on her shoulders as he checked for any signs of injury. His face was a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Claire, you did it. You stopped it." She met his gaze, her eyes wide with exhaustion, but filled with an overwhelming sense of relief. She had won, for now, but the battle wasn't over. The beast still lingered, its dark influence still simmering beneath the surface. "I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting," Claire whispered, her voice raw. "It's too strong. I'm not sure I can hold it back again." Henry's face hardened with resolve, and he gently helped her sit up. "We'll figure this out, Claire. We're not alone in this. We'll find a way to end it together." But even as he said those words, the faintest hint of doubt flickered in Claire's heart. The beast was still there, watching, waiting for the next moment of weakness. And somewhere, deep within her, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was far from over. Claire's body felt like it was made of lead, every muscle aching as she slowly rose to her feet. Henry was still beside her, watching with a mixture of concern and hope, but Claire couldn't shake the heavy, suffocating feeling that was pressing against her chest. The beast was still there, its presence coiled tight inside her like a dormant volcano, waiting for the slightest provocation to erupt. "Claire, are you all right?" Henry asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. He reached out to steady her as she swayed, his hand warm against her cold skin. She didn't answer immediately. Her mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each one darker than the last. How long could she hold on? How much longer could she keep the beast locked inside her before it broke free completely? I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound composed. "I feel it, Henry. It's always there, watching, waiting." He gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll figure it out. We have to." Claire didn't know if she believed him, but she nodded anyway. The fight had taken so much out of her already. Every inch of her soul felt stretched to its breaking point, and the exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. For a moment, the world was quiet. The storm that had raged inside her seemed to subside, replaced by a temporary stillness. But Claire knew better than to trust it. The beast wasn't gone, it was simply lying in wait. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. "Claire, you've made it this far. We're closer to finding a solution. We just need to keep searching. There has to be a way to..." His words were cut off by a sudden, deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Claire's heart pounded as the floor beneath her seemed to tremble. The air around her grew thick and oppressive, as though something dark and ancient was closing in on them. The beast was stirring again. "No!" Claire gasped, panic rising in her chest. "Not now, please." But the creature inside her was no longer willing to be ignored. Its fury surged through her body with a force that felt like an earthquake, twisting her insides, clawing at her mind. She gasped, her hand clutching her stomach as the transformation began again. Faster this time, more violent. Henry stepped back, his eyes wide with terror. "Claire, no! Don't let it take you again." But it was already too late. Her body was no longer her own. The beast's influence had taken full control, and Claire felt herself being ripped from the inside out. Her vision blurred, her mind darkened as the primal hunger took hold of her. Henry's voice became muffled, distant. He was shouting her name, reaching for her, but she couldn't respond. The creature had a grip on her too strong to break. "You can't escape me, Claire," the beast whispered in her mind, its voice dark and filled with satisfaction. "I have waited too long for this. You will be mine, body and soul." Claire's breath quickened as her nails began to elongate, her senses sharpening in an instant. The world around her seemed to slow, everything becoming hyper-real as the transformation took full hold. She could feel every shift in her bones, every change in her body as she became something else, something monstrous. But still she fought it. She had to fight it. She clawed at her own skin, her fingernails digging into her flesh as if she could physically tear the beast out of her. But the more she struggled, the stronger the beast became. "You are nothing," the beast taunted. "You always were weak. This is who you are now. Stop," Claire choked, her voice barely a whisper. "I won't be your puppet. You're already mine," the beast hissed. But then, something inside Claire stirred again. A flicker of that memory, the warm embrace of her mother, the love she had shared with Henry, the strength she had found in their bond, began to rise within her. It was a small thing, fragile, but it was enough. With a scream of rage and defiance, Claire wrenched control back from the beast, pushing against the surge of power. Her body trembled violently, but she managed to snap back to herself, just for a moment. "Henry, I need you," she gasped, her voice hoarse as her hands reached out toward him, her claws retracting. Henry didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, grabbing her hands and holding them tight. "I'm here, Claire. I won't let you go." But the beast wasn't finished yet. Claire could feel it clawing at the edges of her mind, trying to break free. Her head throbbed as though it were being split open, and she fought the overwhelming pressure to give in. "I'm not sure how much longer I can hold it back," she confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "Henry, it's too strong." "No." He shook his head fiercely. "You're stronger than it. We just need more time. We need to keep looking for a way to stop it, Claire. Together." Claire closed her eyes, focusing on his voice, on the strength of his touch, on the warmth of the love they had shared. She could feel herself slipping, but she clung to him, to her humanity, with every ounce of strength she had left. She couldn't lose herself, not like this, not after everything. But deep inside her, the beast was still there, waiting. And Claire knew with growing certainty that if she didn't find a way to end this, if she didn't find a solution soon, she might not be able to stop it. Not forever. The days that followed were filled with silence. The kind of silence that settles over you like a thick fog, suffocating and oppressive, making you question if you're truly alone or if something is lurking just out of sight. Claire could feel the weight of that silence, creeping around her like the beast itself, waiting to strike. Henry stayed close, never far from her side, though she could see the concern in his eyes growing with each passing day. He had stopped asking if she was okay. He knew better now. He knew the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The attacks came more frequently, each one more intense than the last. Claire felt the beast's presence more and more, its grip tightening around her heart. It whispered to her in the darkness of her dreams, calling to her with promises of power and release. It offered her everything she'd ever wanted, everything she had ever feared. One evening, after another failed attempt to keep the beast at bay, Claire found herself standing on the edge of the old bridge, staring down at the black waters below. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows over the rippling surface. It was a place she used to go to think, a place of solitude and peace. But now it felt like the edge of something far more dangerous. Henry had followed her without a word, standing a few paces behind. Claire could feel his presence, but it seemed distant, as though he were a part of another world entirely. The beast had consumed so much of her already that she wasn't sure if she could ever truly return to herself. "Claire." Henry's voice was quiet, but it held a sense of urgency. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes locked on her. "We need to get back. It's getting worse. You know it is." Her breath hitched as her fingers tightened on the cold railing. The beast's presence clawed at her from within, pushing at the edges of her control. "You can't hide from me," it whispered, its voice as smooth as velvet. "You're mine, Claire. You've always been mine." "No," she muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing as she fought against the growing pressure. She wasn't sure how much longer she could resist. Henry's voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "Claire, I'm scared." She turned to face him, her expression softening despite the storm raging inside her. Henry had always been the one person who understood her, the one person who had never judged her. He didn't deserve this. None of them did. "You don't have to be scared," Claire said, her voice shaking. "I'm not going to let it win. I won't let it take me." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. Claire felt the pressure inside her growing, her vision narrowing, the beast clawing its way up to the surface. It was stronger now, more demanding, like a wildfire burning through her veins. She could feel its hunger, its insatiable need to destroy. "Give in," the beast purred, its voice now almost seductive. "Let me take over. You're not strong enough to fight this anymore. You never were." Henry's footsteps were slow as he approached her, concern etched into every line of his face. "Claire, please, we'll figure this out together. Just don't give up." She couldn't meet his gaze, the weight of her own shame too great. She was a monster. She could feel it. The transformation was so close now, so close that it was all she could do to keep herself from giving in. Her claws were beginning to lengthen, the heat in her chest rising like a furnace. Henry reached out, his hand trembling as he placed it gently on her arm. "I love you, Claire. I will always love you, no matter what." The words pierced her heart, and for a moment, Claire felt something stir deep within her. A spark of the woman she used to be. She could almost see her old self. The woman who loved and was loved in return. The woman who hadn't been consumed by this beast. "You cannot escape me." The beast snarled, its voice laced with fury. "You are mine." But Claire fought back. The struggle was immense, her body quaking under the strain. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wanted to scream, to break free, but the beast was too strong. It was everywhere inside her, clawing, consuming, suffocating. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes locked with Henry's one last time, her gaze filled with sorrow and regret. "I'm so sorry." Before he could respond, Claire's body trembled violently. Her limbs twisted unnaturally, her back arching as the beast made its final push. Her vision turned black as she lost all sense of self, the hunger surging through her like a tidal wave. In a final, desperate move, she pushed Henry away with all her remaining strength, just as the transformation took full hold. She felt her claws extend, her body shifting in ways that made her sick to her stomach, but she couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop it. "Claire, no!" Henry cried out, his voice full of panic. He reached for her, but she was too far gone. The world around her blurred into chaos. She heard Henry's shouts, the frantic footsteps, but they seemed distant, as if they were fading from her world, replaced by something far darker. The beast had won. Claire's world had narrowed to a singular focus, the pulsing, aching hunger that throbbed in her chest like a living thing. The beast was no longer a distant whisper, a faint murmur she could suppress with effort. It was her. It had become her, swallowed her, consumed her. There was no separation anymore. The wind howled around her as her claws scraped against the bridge's metal railing. The world seemed to spin, her vision fractured into sharp, jagged fragments, and her ears buzzed with the deafening roar of the beast's fury. She could smell the metallic tang of blood in the air, could feel the muscles in her back twitch as the creature inside her raged for freedom. "Claire, no!" Henry's voice was distant, panicked, but it still pierced through the fog of madness swirling in her mind. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking with his. His eyes were wide with terror, his hands raised in a futile attempt to reach her. He was shouting, pleading with her, but Claire could barely make out the words. She could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation, and it twisted something deep within her, a small part of herself that still clung to the woman she used to be. But the beast had other plans. Kill him. The voice was louder now, commanding, raw with power. It was no longer a whisper, but a force that surged through her veins like wildfire. The hunger gnawed at her insides, growing stronger with each heartbeat, each breath. Claire's vision blurred, the edges of her consciousness retreating into darkness. Henry stepped forward, trembling, his eyes fixed on her. "Please, Claire, you're still in there. I know you are. I won't let you go." His words cut through her, like a knife plunging into the thick fog of the beast's influence. For a fleeting moment, Claire remembered who she was. The girl who had once laughed with him under the stars, who had shared dreams and fears, who had loved with every ounce of her heart. But that girl was slipping away. She felt it, and in that instant, the beast's hunger surged, like a wild animal breaking free of its cage. Without thinking, Claire lunged forward, her claws outstretched, her body moving faster than she ever thought possible. The world around her shattered into fragments of light and sound as the beast overtook her completely. "Kill him," it demanded again, its voice a hot, maddening presence in her mind. But Claire wasn't the one in control anymore. She couldn't stop it. Her claws scraped across the stone pavement as she charged toward Henry. The sound of her own breath, the deep, guttural growl that escaped her throat, was foreign to her ears, alien and terrifying. Henry backed away, his eyes wide with shock and fear, his feet stumbling over the ground as he tried to retreat. "No! Claire, please! Fight it!" Henry's voice cracked as he scrambled backward, his hands raised in defense, but it was useless. He was no match for her strength, her speed, her fury. Claire reached him before he could take another step, her claws raking across his chest. A sound of anguish tore from Henry's throat as he crumpled to the ground, blood soaking his shirt. But it wasn't enough. The hunger gnawed at her, demanding more. Claire's heart thundered in her chest, the beast's insatiable need driving her forward with relentless force. She couldn't stop, couldn't think. She was just a passenger now, riding on the edge of madness. She looked down at Henry, his face twisted in pain, but his eyes were full of something she couldn't bear to see: sorrow. "You've failed him," the beast whispered, its voice cold and triumphant. "You've lost everything." "No." There was a flicker of clarity in Claire's mind, a single thread of resistance. She fought against the beast's grip, clawing her way back to herself, but it was like trying to swim through tar. Every moment was a battle, every breath a struggle. She could feel Henry's blood on her hands, the weight of his gaze as he lay there, broken and vulnerable. "It's too late," the beast jeered. "You'll never win." But Claire wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In a burst of desperation, Claire surged forward, her mind fighting against the overwhelming urge to end it all. She reached out, her trembling hands grasping Henry's face, her claws retracting as she tried to focus on him, on his warmth, on the last piece of humanity that remained. For a second, the beast faltered, the weight of her struggle causing it to pause. The hunger didn't let up, but it hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Henry," she gasped, her voice raw. I'm sorry." And then, with a strength that shocked even her, Claire pulled herself back from the edge. She tore herself away from the beast's hold, pushing it into the deepest recesses of her mind. It clawed and screamed, but Claire didn't listen. She could still hear Henry's breath, shallow and labored, and that was enough to ground her. With everything she had left, Claire lifted Henry's broken form into her arms, cradling him against her chest. She could feel his heartbeat, faint but steady, and the warmth of his skin against hers. He wasn't gone yet. He wasn't lost, and neither was she. With one last, desperate push, Claire willed herself to move, dragging them both away from the edge of the bridge and back into the world she wasn't sure she could ever truly leave behind. The world felt hazy, like a dream Claire couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. Her vision swam in and out of focus, her legs trembling beneath her as she stumbled forward, Henry's unconscious form clutched tightly against her chest. The weight of him felt both heavy and comforting, grounding her in a reality that felt increasingly foreign. She had been so close to losing him forever, and yet somehow she hadn't. Not yet. Her heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline still rushing through her veins, her body on the edge of collapse. The beast inside her snarled, furious and relentless, but Claire held it back with every ounce of strength she had left. It was there, clawing at her, gnashing its teeth, but it had to wait. For now, Claire was in control. She had to be. She could feel Henry's blood soaking through her clothes, feel his heartbeat weak, fragile, but still there. His breath came in shallow gasps, his body limp against hers. She couldn't let him slip away. Not like this. Not after everything. The bridge loomed behind her, the vast darkness of the woods stretching out before them, the trees whispering in the wind. The path ahead was uncertain. Claire didn't know what awaited her, didn't know how to stop the monster that clawed at the edges of her mind. But she couldn't stop now. She had to keep moving, had to find a way to save them both. "Run," the beast hissed inside her mind. "You can't fight me. You know that, don't you?" Her steps faltered as a surge of rage bubbled to the surface. The words were familiar, taunting, like a cruel echo that never quite left her. She could feel it in her blood, the rage, the hunger. It was so close, but she wasn't going to give in. Not now, not after everything. She pushed the thoughts aside, her hand trembling as it gripped Henry's shoulder, dragging him forward with every ounce of strength. She could feel the weight of her own exhaustion pulling at her limbs, her body on the verge of collapse, but there was no stopping. She couldn't stop. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, sending a chill down Claire's spine. It was then she realized she had wandered deeper into the forest than she had intended. The trees around them were thick and dense, casting long shadows over the ground. The darkness felt heavier here, suffocating, as though the very woods themselves were alive, watching, waiting. She could hear something in the distance, a rustling sound, like the leaves shifting in the breeze. But it wasn't the wind. It was something else. Something. Watching them. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Henry stirred in her arms, his eyes fluttering open, groggy and disoriented. His hand weakly reached for her, his fingers brushing against her skin. "Claire," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What happened? Where are we?" "I don't know," Claire murmured, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. She kept moving, her eyes scanning the darkness around them, the unease creeping into her bones. We're getting out of here." "Claire." Henry's voice was strained, the concern in his eyes clear despite the confusion. "You're not." "I'm fine," she interrupted, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I'm fine. Just stay with me." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. She wasn't fine. None of this was fine. The beast's hunger gnawed at her insides, louder now, almost deafening in her mind. "You're not fine," it whispered, its voice a low growl. "You'll never be fine. You'll always be mine. You can't escape me." Claire squeezed her eyes shut, pushing the voice away, forcing herself to concentrate on the path ahead. They had to find shelter, a place to regroup. They couldn't keep moving like this, out in the open, vulnerable to whatever was out there. The rustling sound grew louder, closer now, and Claire's heartbeat quickened. She turned her head, scanning the shadows, her senses on high alert. Something was out there, something that wasn't quite right. Something that moved with the silence of a predator, watching, waiting. She took a deep breath, her grip tightening on Henry. "We need to keep going," she muttered. "Stay close." But as she started to move forward again, her steps faltered, her breath catching in her throat. From the shadows of the trees, a figure stepped out into the moonlight. It was tall, too tall. Its silhouette was unnaturally thin, its limbs long and spindly, and its face, Claire's stomach churned at the sight of it, was a mask of something. Not human. Hollow eyes stared at them, black and empty, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. It was grinning at them, a wide, stretched grin that made Claire's blood run cold. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the creature. Henry gasped, his eyes widening as he caught sight of it. "Claire, what is that?" "I don't know," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Her grip on him tightened as she took a slow, shaky step back, her eyes never leaving the creature in front of them. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching them, its grin widening. And then it spoke. "She's mine." The voice was low, guttural, and it echoed through Claire's mind, like it was coming from within her own skull. It was the beast. No, it wasn't the beast. It was something worse. A shiver ran down Claire's spine as the creature stepped closer, its movements unnatural, jerky, like a puppet with its strings pulled by something far more sinister. Henry recoiled, but Claire couldn't move. She could feel the beast stirring inside her again, its hunger surging as the figure drew closer. The creature's grin grew wider, its eyes gleaming with a hunger all its own. Claire felt it closing in, felt the weight of its presence pressing down on her. And for the first time since the transformation had begun, she realized this was the thing that had been waiting for her. It wasn't just the beast inside her. It was something worse, something far more dangerous. Her body trembled, her mind spiraling into a vortex of terror. "It's too late," the creature's voice echoed. "You belong to me, Claire." The world seemed to shudder around Claire, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The creature before her, its grotesque form standing like a twisted omen, seemed to pierce the very air with its unnatural presence. Its grin, wide and cruel, sent a wave of nausea crashing through her chest, the hunger within her flaring in response, as if the two forces were bound together by something older, darker than she could understand. It wasn't the beast she had come to fear, but it was tied to it. She could feel it deep in her bones. This thing, whatever it was part of the nightmare she couldn't escape. You don't belong here, Claire's voice faltered, but she forced herself to speak, to take command of the situation, to cling to any shred of control she could find. Get away from us. The creature cocked its head to the side, its long limbs shifting in a way that felt wrong, unnatural, as if its joints didn't bend quite the way they should. It was almost as if it was studying her, as if it knew her thoughts. Oh, but I do belong here, Claire, the creature rasped, its voice cold and hollow, seeping into her very skin. I've always been here. You've always belonged to me. Claire felt her heart stop. A part of her, somewhere deep inside, had been dreading this moment. The truth she'd been trying to outrun for so long. She had wondered if the beast inside her had come from the forest, if it had been created here in the heart of these woods. But this thing wasn't a mere part of the beast. It was something more. No! Henry breathed, his voice strained. No, Claire. You don't listen to it. But Claire barely heard him. Her mind was reeling, her body frozen in place. The creature's grin widened, revealing sharp, elongated teeth, its eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. It was waiting for her to understand, waiting for her to grasp the horrible truth. You should have known, the creature continued, its voice now laced with an eerie amusement. The curse runs deeper than you think. It's always been a part of you, Claire. Always been a part of the land. The beast is not just in you. It's in the very soil beneath your feet. The forest, the trees, the darkness. All of it. Claire staggered back, her pulse quickening. The land. It was too much. She had always known the transformation was unnatural. But this was something she hadn't been prepared for. It wasn't just the creature within her. It was everything. The woods, the curse, the thing that had haunted her for so long. It was all connected. You are the vessel, Claire. The creature continued, its voice like ice. The beast is merely the beginning. When you're ready, I will awaken the rest of it in you. You'll become what you were always meant to be. Henry's hand shot out, grabbing her arm as he stepped forward, desperate to shield her. No, Claire, don't listen to it. You are not this, whatever it is. Claire's heart clenched at the sound of his voice, the plea in his words, but the beast's whispers grew louder, more insistent. You can't stop me, it hissed. You'll become me. You'll become us. Leave us alone, Henry shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. He took a step toward the creature, but Claire, still reeling, grabbed his wrist, pulling him back. No, Henry, she whispered, barely able to form the words. I don't think we can fight it. Not like this. The creature's laugh was a low, guttural sound that rumbled through the ground beneath them, shaking the very earth. It seemed to savor their fear, drawing strength from their panic. Claire's breath hitched, her body trembling with the weight of the truth settling on her. It wasn't just the beast she had to worry about. It was this thing, this ancient, malevolent force that had been hiding in the dark for centuries. You're wrong, Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. The words tasted like ash on her tongue, but she forced herself to say them. You'll never have me. I'll never become you. The creature's grin faltered for a moment, its hollow eyes narrowing. You think you can stop me? It hissed. You've already started the process. There's no going back. You'll become what you were meant to be, Claire. No one escapes me. The ground beneath them shuddered again, as if the very earth itself was alive and responding to the creature's power. Claire felt the weight of its presence pressing down on her, suffocating her. The beast inside her surged once more, clawing at her from the inside, roaring in hunger. She fought against it, pushing the darkness back with all the strength she had left. But the creature was right about one thing. There was no going back. The transformation had already begun. The beast wasn't just inside her anymore. It was all around her, and she could feel the pull of it like a magnetic force. "We need to get out of here," Henry said urgently, his voice strained, pulling Claire from her spiraling thoughts. "Now!" But before Claire could respond, the creature spoke again, its voice a deep growl. "You can try to run, but it will find you. The curse will follow you wherever you go." Claire's mind raced. She had to move. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't face this creature. Not now. Not in her current state. The beast was still too strong inside her. And if she let it take over again, she might lose everything. Henry herself, her humanity. But before they could retreat, the creature raised a skeletal hand. And in an instant, the ground beneath Claire's feet cracked open. A deep, guttural roar erupted from the earth, and the world seemed to break apart around her. The earth split, revealing a dark, yawning chasm. From the depths of the hole, shadowy figures began to rise, clawing their way out of the ground, their eyes glowing with malevolent energy. The creature grinned again, its hollow eyes gleaming with anticipation. "It's too late for escape," it whispered. "The beast will come for you. The land will claim you. The curse has already begun." The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Claire felt herself being pulled toward the chasm, the monstrous forms emerging from the abyss like the very hands of fate, reaching for her. "No," Claire gasped, struggling to keep her balance. "No, not like this." But the creature's voice echoed in her mind, the sound of it reverberating through every inch of her being. "You're already mine." Claire turned her head sharply to Henry, her eyes wide with terror. "Henry, run!" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, drowned out by the shrieking wind and the rumbling earth. But Henry was frozen, his eyes locked on the rising horrors from the abyss. The figures emerging from the chasm moved with unnatural speed, their elongated forms crawling and slithering, merging with the shadows, too many to count. The beast inside Claire roared louder, clawing at her thoughts, pushing at her chest like it wanted to break free. "You cannot run from this," it growled in her mind. "You belong to it, Claire. You belong to the darkness." Henry shook his head, his grip tightening on her arm. "No, I won't leave you. We'll fight this together." His voice was filled with desperation, but there was something else there, something that made Claire's heart twist in pain. Hope. But Claire knew. They couldn't fight this. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing in on them from all sides. The land, the shadows, the creature. Everything was closing in. She could feel the power growing stronger around them, like a net pulling tighter. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, her breath shaky as she tried to fight back the tears. "I can't do this. Not like this." "Claire," Henry's voice cracked, his grip on her arm tightening, his face drawn with worry and fear. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll find a way." But Claire's gaze drifted past him, her eyes locked on the creature, its hollow eyes gleaming with satisfaction, its wide, twisted grin growing. The ground trembled beneath their feet again, and with it, a low, guttural rumble that echoed from the depths of the chasm. Claire could feel her body begin to tremble, the beast clawing within her, demanding to be let free. "Let go, Claire. It's time. Join us." The voice slithered through her mind, the beast's presence overwhelming, suffocating. But then something inside her snapped. "No," Claire gasped. "No more." She shoved Henry back, her strength fueled by sheer desperation, and stumbled away from him. She could hear his voice calling out to her, but the words faded, drowned out by the roar of the chasm, the growing howls of the creatures that clawed their way up from the depths. "You can't escape me, Claire." The beast was inside her, in her veins, in her soul, clawing its way to the surface. "You were always mine." With all her remaining strength, Claire gritted her teeth and forced her body forward, stumbling into the darkness of the woods, away from Henry, away from the creatures that were closing in. She didn't know where she was running. She didn't know if she could outrun the beast inside her. or the darkness that followed her. But she had to try. She had to do something to protect him, to protect them both. Behind her, she heard Henry shout her name, his voice full of anguish, but she couldn't stop. The darkness was closing in too fast. She could hear the creatures behind her, their screeching whispers getting louder, their claws scraping against the earth. She was running, but it didn't feel like she was moving forward. It felt like the world was folding in on itself, collapsing around her. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, her legs weak, and her body screamed in protest. She could feel the transformation deepening, the beast within her growing stronger. Her skin tingled with the heat of it, the urge to give and pulsing in her chest. But she had to keep fighting. She had to keep running. The trees around her began to blur together, their dark, gnarled branches twisting into grotesque shapes, like the limbs of some ancient, monstrous creature. The woods were alive with a dark energy, the shadows pressing in tighter and tighter. Claire's mind reeled as she struggled to push the thoughts of the beast away. It's too late. It's already begun. You belong to it. The voice was deafening now, filling her mind, drowning her in the weight of its power. It was too much. Too much. And then, through the madness, she saw it. A glimmer of light. It was faint at first, but it grew brighter as she moved closer. Her legs moved on their own accord, driven by a force she couldn't explain. The light was warm, pure, a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding her. The light at the edge of the woods. The shadows seemed to recoil from it, the creatures halting in their pursuit, their presence fading as if they couldn't touch the light. Claire reached it, gasping for breath, her heart pounding as she staggered into the clearing. The light surrounded her, wrapping around her like a protective embrace. She could feel the beast inside her, the darkness, pulling and clawing at her, but the light held it back. It pushed against the darkness, like the sun pushing against the night. She collapsed to her knees in the center of the clearing, panting, her body trembling, her mind spinning. You think the light can save you? The voice snarled in her head, but its power seemed to wane, like it couldn't reach her in this place. You will fall. You will become me. There is no escape. Claire's fingers dug into the dirt beneath her, her nails scraping against the earth, her mind screaming as the beast inside her fought for control. But the light wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Suddenly, she heard a voice, soft, familiar, cut through the dark. Claire. She looked up, her eyes wide and unblinking, and through the shimmering light, she saw him. Henry. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, his face drawn with worry, but his eyes filled with determination. I'm not leaving you, he said firmly, his voice reaching her across the vast space. Claire's heart leapt in her chest. She didn't know how he had found her, but in that moment, she didn't care. The light was around them both now, the warmth of it a shield against the darkness. Together, they stood in the clearing, the beast's voice fading, its power waning. And yet Claire knew this wasn't over. The creature might be gone for now, but it would always be there, lurking in the shadows. The darkness, the curse, they would always come back. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Claire believed that perhaps there was still hope. And with Henry by her side, they would face it together. Claire's breathing slowly steadied as the light around her flickered, soft and steady, like the first rays of dawn after a long, oppressive night. It was as though the very earth beneath her had finally exhaled, allowing the momentary peace to settle. She closed her eyes, the warmth of the light washing over her, grounding her, reminding her that for the first time in so long, she wasn't alone. Henry's presence was a constant, his arms reaching for her, steadying her as she shakily rose to her feet. We're okay now, he whispered, though his voice was strained, his face drawn with worry. But Claire wasn't so sure. The light felt safe. It was the first semblance of peace she'd felt in what seemed like a lifetime, but the darkness was far from gone. The beast still raged within her, its hunger far from satisfied, gnawing at her from the inside. She knew it wouldn't be enough. I don't know how much longer the light will hold, Claire muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt her chest tighten as she spoke, the beast clawing beneath her skin. The forest is still alive. The curse, it's still in me. Henry's hand tightened around hers, his grip warm and firm. We'll find a way to fight it. You're stronger than this, Claire. I know you are. Claire shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Stronger? I can't even keep it at bay anymore. I feel it, Henry, every day, every hour. It's in me. It's a part of me. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that I'm in control. Henry didn't speak at first, his eyes searching her face as if trying to read the unspoken words she hadn't said. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice quiet but resolute. You're not pretending, Claire. You're fighting, and you're not alone anymore. We can do this together, but we have to move quickly. The forest, it's not just watching us anymore. It's waiting. Claire's heart pounded in her chest at his words, a fresh wave of fear crashing over her. She could feel it too, the weight of unseen eyes upon them, the suffocating sense of being surrounded by something that could strike at any moment. The shadows around the clearing began to grow deeper, curling at the edges of the light, eager to reclaim the darkness. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble again, not violently as it had before, but with a constant pulsing rhythm, a heartbeat. The forest, alive and ancient, was waking up. The curse, Claire whispered, her voice raw with fear. It's not just something that's inside me. It's tied to the land, to everything here. Henry's brow furrowed. You think the beast. It's not just something you've become. It's tied to the very land. Claire nodded grimly, taking in the creeping shadows around them. That's what it's been trying to tell me all along. I didn't understand before, but now, her voice faltered. Now I know. The light flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. She could feel the pressure of the dark force gathering once more. The creatures, the ones that had risen from the chasm, were still out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing. They were waiting for her to slip. Henry, Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. The curse, the beast, is not just about me anymore. It's the land. It's in the trees, the earth, everything. And it's calling for something. I think it's calling for me. Henry stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with determination. Then we need to find a way to stop it, to sever whatever connection you have to it. But how? Claire's voice was barely a whisper. She felt a cold, suffocating grip around her chest. How do we break something that's been in this land for centuries? Henry opened his mouth, but before he could answer, a strange noise cut through the air, a low, unnatural hum that seemed to vibrate through the very soil. It echoed like a warning, growing louder, vibrating through Claire's chest, until she thought her ribs might crack under the pressure. The ground beneath them shifted again, and Claire felt the energy change, becoming more chaotic. Then she heard it whispers soft at first, but growing louder. It was impossible to distinguish the words, but the language felt ancient, older than anything she'd ever heard. The creatures were coming, and they weren't just in the shadows anymore. They were all around them. Henry spun around, pulling Claire toward him, but the light that had surrounded them began to flicker, struggling against the rising darkness. We need to find shelter, Henry said urgently. Come on, we can't stay here. But Claire's feet felt as though they were made of lead. Her gaze remained fixed on the growing darkness, her mind racing. I can feel it, Henry, she said, her voice trembling. It's here, the beast, it's hard. The land, it's alive, and it's pulling me in. The curse, it's not just something I can fight. It's rooted in the very earth. The shadows were swirling now, like a storm taking shape, closing in around them. Claire could feel it all, the darkness pressing against her skin, the weight of the forest's ancient power, the weight of everything that had come before. The creature's whispers had become louder, but she couldn't make out the words anymore. It didn't matter. The curse was no longer just in her mind. It was in the land, and it was pulling her deeper. Henry's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. We need to move now, Claire. We need to find the heart of it, the place where it all began. Claire stared at him, her heart racing. The heart. The heart of the curse, Henry said, pulling her toward him. The place where it all began. We need to sever the connection. We need to destroy the root of it all. Claire didn't know if they could make it. The forest was coming alive, its power too much for her to understand. But she had no choice. She had to try. She had to fight. They turned, moving as fast as they could through the thick woods. The light around them flickered and waned, casting long, menacing shadows in its wake. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and Claire could feel the darkness pressing against her skin, pulling her towards something she couldn't see, but could feel with every fiber of her being. The land was calling her, and soon it would claim her. The forest pressed in closer, its dark limbs reaching down like twisted hands, and the air felt thick with something ancient, something that had existed long before the world above. The whispers of the creatures, if they could even be called that, grew louder, blending with the rustling of the trees, as though the very earth was alive, mocking them. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled over the uneven ground, her breath sharp and ragged. Henry's hand gripped hers tightly, but even his strength seemed frail against the weight of the curse pressing down on them. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Claire gasped, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the wind. The beast inside her raged, clawing at her thoughts, forcing its way to the surface. It's too strong. We're close, Henry said, his voice grim, but filled with determination. We have to be. The heart, the place where the curse started. We can't stop now. Every step she took felt like wading through thick mud, and yet Claire couldn't stop. She could feel it now, the pulse of something ancient beneath her feet, thumping in time with the wild beating of her heart. The land was alive, and it was pulling her toward it. Ahead, a clearing began to emerge, an unnatural one. It was different from the rest of the woods. They had passed hundreds of trees, dense and suffocating, and now the world opened. Up before them, an almost perfect circle of nothing but shadows. The trees around the clearing were twisted, bent at odd angles, as though the earth itself had grown sick. In the center of the clearing was an altar, a stone structure, worn and weathered, its edges jagged and uneven, like something forgotten by time. The stone was blackened, scorched by something, but still solid, ancient. It was the epicenter of the darkness. This is it, Claire whispered, her throat dry, as she felt the pull intensify. She stopped in her tracks, her body shuddering. The beast inside her was ravenous now, its claws tearing at her thoughts. Let go, it urged, its voice thick with hunger. It's time to return to the abyss. No, Claire gasped, shaking her head, trying to push the voice away. Not yet. I won't let you. Henry stopped beside her, his breath quick and shallow, but his gaze was fixed on the altar. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed their surroundings. We need to destroy it. This is the source. We can stop it here. But even as he spoke, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and Claire's heart lurched. The altar pulsed, its stones vibrating like a heartbeat. The shadows around them seemed to grow longer, darker. Something was rising from the altar, a mass of swirling darkness, like a great storm moving in. It's too late, Claire whispered, a sickening realization sinking in. The beast wasn't just in her, it was here in this place. The land was alive with its power, and the altar was its anchor. Henry's hand tightened around hers, pulling her back toward the edge of the clearing, away from the altar. We need to move. Now! But Claire didn't follow. Her feet were rooted to the ground as the darkness began to surge from the stone altar, crawling toward her like a living thing, tendrils of shadow reaching out to claim her. The beast was here, pulling her into its depths, and there was no escaping it. She could feel its claws, its presence, wrapping around her soul. It's too late, Claire. You belong to me. To us. Claire gasped for breath as the darkness closed in, its weight suffocating. She could feel the forest, the land, pulling her down into its embrace. And then, through the abyss, she saw it, something else. Something faint but real. A flicker of light, like a distant star. Henry, Claire cried out, her voice breaking. She turned toward him, her eyes wide with fear. "Henry, you have to leave. It's too strong. I can't." Before she could finish, the darkness surged forward, enveloping her, and she felt herself falling, her body sinking into the earth as the shadows wrapped themselves around her, dragging her downward into the blackness. "Claire!" Henry screamed, his voice desperate as he reached for her. His hand brushed against her arm, but it was too late. The darkness had claimed her. She could feel herself being pulled deeper, the light growing fainter, the voice of the beast growing louder. She wanted to fight, but the weight of the curse was too much, too overwhelming. "You are mine," it whispered. "You always were." And then something shifted. A crack of light tore through the darkness, and Claire was no longer alone. She could hear Henry's voice, faint but steady, calling to her, pulling her back toward the light. It was like a thread tethering her to the world above. "Claire, come back," Henry whispered. His voice was soft, but there was strength in it. "You're not alone. We can still do this." Claire reached out with all the strength she had left, pushing against the darkness that threatened to consume her. The beast inside her screamed in fury, its claws raking at her mind. But Henry's presence, his voice, his unwavering belief in her, kept her tethered to the world above. For a moment, the shadows began to wane, and the light grew brighter, pushing back the darkness. But Claire knew this wasn't over, not yet. The beast was still here, still clawing at her from the inside, still trying to drag her down. But Henry wasn't going to let her go. With one final, desperate breath, Claire pulled herself free from the abyss. The darkness screamed in fury, but it was too late. She broke through, and the light flooded her, chasing away the shadows, pushing back the beast. For now, she was free. The light around Claire was blinding, too bright, too pure for the darkness that still clung to her soul. She staggered backward, the force of the light pushing against her as the forest, now silent, seemed to breathe in unison with her ragged breaths. Henry was beside her, his arms steady around her waist, guiding her back toward the clearing's edge. His face was pale, his eyes wide with concern, but beneath it, there was relief. "Claire," he whispered, his voice soft, the sound like a balm to her frayed nerves. "You did it. You broke free." Claire couldn't respond. Her lungs burned, as if she'd been holding her breath for far too long. She wanted to collapse, to sink to the ground, and let the darkness fade away. But her body felt alien to her, heavy, like she was still tethered to something deep beneath the earth. The weight of the curse still lingered in her chest, a gnawing hunger that would not be satisfied. She could feel it, sharp and cold, scratching at the edges of her thoughts. The beast hadn't fully left. It was simply waiting. "Claire, we need to go. The longer we stay here, the more powerful it becomes," Henry said, his voice urgent now, as he helped her move away from the altar. "We need to destroy the source before it regains strength." Claire's voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "I can't go any further. I can't fight this anymore. The curse. It's a me, Henry. It always will be." The wind howled around them, carrying the faintest whisper of the forest's ancient voice. The ground trembled once again beneath their feet, and the trees groaned as though in mourning. The land was alive, alive with grief, with rage, with hunger. Henry's grip tightened around her arm, a quiet resolve in his gaze. "You're not alone, Claire. You said it yourself. We need to destroy it. Together." Claire shook her head, pulling away from him, taking a few unsteady steps back. "No, I've fought for so long. I can't keep doing this." She paused, looking down at her hands, which trembled uncontrollably. "I don't know how much of me is still me anymore. Every part of me feels like it's unraveling." The forest seemed to hold its breath as Claire's words hung in the air. For a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. "I'm not going to give up on you," Henry said, his voice unwavering. "And I'm not going to let this win. We'll find a way. We'll fight it together." Claire looked up at him, the words dying on her lips. The look in his eyes, the fierce determination, made something inside her shift. She had always been strong, always been determined to face the beast alone, but she couldn't do it anymore. Not without him. Not without the person who believed in her when she couldn't even believe in herself. Her chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat. Henry, Before she could finish, the air around them seemed to crack, and the ground trembled once more. The altar, the stone structure, began to pulse again, the blackened stones shuddering violently. The darkness within it was growing, stronger, angrier. The earth itself seemed to be groaning in agony. "Look out!" Henry shouted, pulling Claire away just as a massive tendril of shadow shot from the altar, slicing through the air like a serpent strike. The tip of it lashed out, snapping like a whip, and Claire barely dodged it, her body moving on instinct. The shadows curled around the clearing, thick and oppressive, and Claire could hear the low, guttural growl of something far older than the land itself. The beast was waking. It was coming. "Get to the altar!" Henry yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to destroy it now." Claire stumbled toward the stone altar, her body heavy with the weight of the curse. Her mind was foggy, every step a struggle against the overwhelming darkness that was threatening to drag her back. Her vision blurred, and she could feel the beast's presence clawing at her, its hunger sharp, ravenous. "No," Claire whispered, her voice breaking as she forced her feet to move. "Not again. Not this time." The tendrils of shadow lunged at them, coiling around the trees, the ground, trying to close in on them. But they couldn't stop. They had to destroy the altar before it consumed everything. Henry was already at the altar, his hands gripping the jagged stone, and he turned to Claire, his eyes wide with fear, but also with unwavering purpose. "Claire, please. You have to help me. We can't do this alone." Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she forced herself to move forward. She felt the weight of the beast inside her, felt its claws ripping at her thoughts. "Let me out," it growled, its voice seething with malice. "I will take you back to the depths." But Claire clenched her jaw, pushing it down, holding on to the small sliver of herself that was still fighting. She couldn't let it win. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. She reached the altar, her hands shaking as she touched the cold stone. It was warm to the touch, and Claire could feel the pulse of the curse beneath it. She could feel the dark force, the heart of the land, pounding within as if alive. "Do it now," Henry shouted, his voice shaking. Claire took a deep breath, and with one final push, she placed both hands against the altar. The darkness surged at her in response, its hunger overwhelming, but she forced herself to remain still. The ground beneath them cracked, and the air grew thick with an unnatural energy, but Claire kept her focus. With a final scream, she summoned every last ounce of willpower she had left. The darkness exploded from the altar, but this time, it was different. This time, it couldn't hold her. The curse, this ancient power, broke. And with it, the ground beneath them split open, a tremendous roar shaking the earth. Claire's knees buckled as the force of the explosion hit her, but Henry caught her, steadying her before she could fall. The world around them seemed to implode, and the shadows dissipated in a violent burst of light. And then silence. The earth stilled. The whispers of the beast faded, and the oppressive weight of the curse that had haunted Claire for so long lifted. She closed her eyes, gasping for breath, her heart still racing. "We did it," Henry whispered, his voice full of awe. He held her tightly, and Claire felt the last vestiges of the darkness that had clung to her fade away. It was over. The light that had flooded the clearing now slowly began to recede, leaving behind an eerie stillness. For a moment, the world felt peaceful. The forest, no longer thrumming with the power of the curse, seemed to take a breath. The trees, once twisted and corrupted, now appeared almost serene, their branches reaching skyward like arms yearning for the sun. Claire stood shakily in the middle of the clearing, her legs still unsteady, her breath shallow. The weight that had once felt so suffocating, so relentless, had disappeared. The air was crisp now, fresh, and the earth beneath her feet no longer felt as though it was alive with malignant intent. But she knew that the peace was fleeting. "Are you okay?" Henry's voice broke through the silence, warm and concerned as he stepped closer, reaching for her hand. His gaze was soft, but there was an edge to his expression, one she hadn't seen before. He was watching her closely, as though expecting something more. "I'm not sure," Claire whispered, lifting her hand to her face. She wiped away the dirt, the sweat, but it couldn't erase the tremor in her fingers. "I feel lighter, but I don't think it's over." Henry's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The curse is gone, Claire. We did it. We destroyed the heart." She shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing as she glanced around the clearing, her mind racing. "It's not the curse that's gone, Henry. The land, it's still. Watching. Something's still here. I can feel it." Her heart began to race once again as she looked up at the sky, her senses heightened, the air thickening once more. "It's not over. Not yet." Henry turned his head, his eyes scanning the once forbidding forest. "You think the beast is still out there?" Claire nodded. The beast was never the source of all this. It was just a manifestation, a tool. Whatever dark force lies beneath this land, it's still here. Henry's face paled as he stepped closer to her. "What does that mean for us? For this place?" Claire swallowed hard, the panic rising again. "It means we need to leave. We've broken the surface, but we haven't destroyed the core. The curse may have been tied to the land, but it's only one part of something older, something more powerful." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. A low, rumbling growl rose from deep within the earth, shaking the trees and rattling the stones of the broken altar. The forest shifted as if it were waking from a long slumber, the very air thickening with a presence that was far colder than any natural storm. Henry stepped back instinctively, pulling Claire with him. "We can't stay here. Whatever's coming, it's not something we can fight with just our hands." Claire nodded, fear crawling up her spine. "We need to leave. We need to warn the others." But before they could turn, the earth cracked open beneath their feet, sending jagged fissures shooting outward in every direction. The forest screamed in agony, and a deep, black mist began to spill from the cracks. It moved toward them like a tidal wave, swirling around the edges of the clearing. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she watched the ground split further, as if something ancient was forcing its way out of the very earth. "No!" Claire whispered. "No! This isn't possible." The mist grew darker, thicker, and within its depths, something began to take shape. It was not the beast they had fought, not the twisted monster of fur and claws. This was something far, more insidious. The mist coiled and writhed, and from it, a figure began to emerge, tall, impossibly tall, with a humanoid shape, but the features were obscured by shadow. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were like black holes, empty and infinite, sucking the light from the world around it. It spoke, its voice not like any sound Claire had ever heard. It wasn't a voice at all. It was more like a force, an oppressive weight on her mind, speaking directly into her thoughts. "You think you have destroyed me? You think you have broken my will?" The voice boomed. "You have merely touched the surface. I am the land. I am the earth beneath your feet. I am the forgotten, the hidden, the eternal." Claire froze, her chest tightening as the ground beneath her seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The entity before them was not something they could fight. It wasn't physical, it was everywhere. Henry grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "What is that thing?" "I don't know," Claire gasped. "But it's the source, the true source. We've only seen its shadow." The figure before them loomed larger, the mist spreading like ink across the land. Its presence felt like an impending storm, one that would swallow them whole. The trees twisted and creaked, their trunks bending under the weight of the creature's gaze. "You think you can destroy me?" The voice whispered, now softer, but laced with contempt. "You think I can be killed so easily? I am ancient. I am older than time itself. I have waited for millennia, and now you will all bow before me." Claire felt the ground shaking beneath her, the force of the entity's power pulling at her very soul. She could feel it reaching out, grasping at her with invisible claws, and she stumbled back, her mind in turmoil. "We have to leave," she gasped. "It's too powerful. We can't fight this." But Henry was already moving forward, his jaw set with determination. "We can't run. Not this time. We have to end it here." Claire reached for him, fear twisting her insides. "Henry, don't. We'll die if you stay." But it was too late. Henry had already stepped into the mist, his figure disappearing into the blackness that now surrounded them. Claire screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the growing storm. She had to follow him. She couldn't let him face this alone. Without thinking, she ran into the mist, her heart hammering in her chest. As she stepped forward, she felt the pressure on her chest increase, as though the very air was being squeezed from her lungs. The world around her twisted and distorted, and she could hear Henry's voice calling out from somewhere in the fog. "Henry!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the swirling darkness. "You will never escape." The voice spoke again, growing louder, reverberating in her skull. "This world is mine, and now so are you." Claire's vision blurred as the ground beneath her feet began to crumble away, and the light she had fought so hard for dimmed. The mist was suffocating, wrapping around Claire like cold, wet tendrils. Every breath she drew felt thick, as though the air itself were alive, feeding off her fear. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled forward, desperate to find Henry amidst the dark fog. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself were shifting, threatening to swallow her whole. "Henry!" she cried again, her voice trembling, but the sound was swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence that hung around her. She could hear nothing but the rush of her own heartbeat and the unsettling whispers of the mist, curling and twisting around her like a living thing. "You cannot escape, Claire." The voice, low and menacing, reverberated in her mind, sending a chill through her bones. It was the creature, the one that had emerged from the depths of the earth. Its presence was everywhere, surrounding her, its words like poison, seeping into her thoughts. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but a fleeting shadow, a momentary distraction. The land is mine, the earth is mine, and now you'll be mine too." Claire's breath hitched as the words slammed into her, the weight of the entity's power pressing against her like a physical force. Her legs wobbled, and for a moment, she feared she might collapse under the pressure. But she couldn't give up, not now. Not when Henry was out there. Not when the land itself was rising against them. She pushed through the fog, forcing herself to keep moving, her eyes scanning the darkness around her. The mist seemed to shift and change, the ground beneath her feet buckling with every step she took. The trees, once distant, now loomed over her like twisted giants, their gnarled branches reaching down as though they meant to ensnare her. "Henry!" she shouted again, her voice strained, but it felt futile. The mist swallowed her words before they could even reach the edge of the clearing. Her mind raced. She had to focus. She had to find him. They had to get out of here. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't the beast, but it was close. Too close. The sound was so faint, but it was enough to make her stop in her tracks. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she whipped around, her body tensing. From the fog emerged a shape, dark and formless, moving in the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands trembled as she reached for her knife, her only defense against whatever horror was lurking. But as the shape drew nearer, Claire's blood ran cold. It wasn't a creature, not like the beast she had fought before. This was something worse, something human. Henry stumbled into view, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with terror. His clothing was torn, and there was dirt and blood smeared across his skin. He looked like a man lost in the depths of hell, his body battered, his spirit broken. "Henry!" Claire cried, rushing forward, her heart soaring at the sight of him. But as she reached out for him, her hand passed through his body as though he were nothing more than smoke. Claire staggered back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What was happening? No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, no, no. Henry's form flickered and twisted, the shape of his body warping as if it were made of shadow. His face, his eyes were empty, hollow. A chilling laugh echoed from the depths of the fog, and Claire's stomach lurched in horror. He's not real, Claire. The voice, low, mocking, was unmistakable. The entity had taken Henry's form, using it to torment her. It was feeding off her fear, manipulating her memories, twisting them into something monstrous. Claire fell to her knees, the weight of the revelation crushing her chest. The man she had fought so hard to protect, he was gone. And this was just another manifestation of the land's hunger. A cruel trick designed to tear her apart. You're too late, the voice sneered, and the figure of Henry dissolved into the mist, leaving only the echoes of its laughter behind. Claire's hands curled into fists at her sides. No, she couldn't let this destroy her. She wouldn't let it, not after everything they had endured, not after all the pain and sacrifice. She pushed herself to her feet, her body shaking, but her resolve hardening. The entity might have taken Henry, but it couldn't take her spirit. She would fight. She had to. Her mind raced, and she remembered the stories, the legends that had whispered of the ancient curse of the land's true nature. This thing was not a god. It was not an unkillable force. It was a prisoner, bound by ancient magic, driven by its hunger for souls. But it was still bound. The land was still a prison, and Claire had broken part of its hold. She had shattered the surface, and now she had to go deeper. She had to destroy the source once and for all. The mist continued to swirl around her, suffocating and thick, but Claire pushed through it. Her heart beat in time with her steps, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet matching her determination. She could feel the heartbeat of the land, dark and powerful, and she knew that if she could reach its core, if she could destroy the source, the curse would be broken. It was the only way. Claire moved forward, ignoring the darkness, ignoring the whispers that tried to pull her under. The land might have power, but she had the will to fight it. And for the first time since they had entered this hellish place, she realized that Henry's spirit wasn't gone. He was in her heart, in her resolve. I will finish this, Claire whispered to herself, her voice steady with newfound determination. The mist parted just slightly, revealing an opening in the ground ahead, a jagged rift, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. The source was near. Without hesitation, Claire sprinted toward the rift, her breath heavy but purposeful. The earth trembled beneath her feet as she neared the opening. The ground seemed to pull at her, as though trying to drag her into its depths. You cannot win, Claire. This is my domain. You cannot escape me. The voice rumbled, but Claire was no longer afraid. She had come too far to turn back now. With one final, determined step, she leaped into the rift. The world seemed to collapse around Claire as she fell into the rift, her body pulled by an unseen force into the depths below. Her stomach lurched, and her chest tightened as the darkness closed in on her, swallowing the light completely. She had no sense of direction, no sense of time. She was tumbling through endless nothingness, her mind screaming as the air pressed against her skin, the earth's pulse now a low thrum beneath her. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. What if this was the end? What if this was how she was meant to die, trapped forever in the belly of this cursed earth? But then the sensation shifted. Her fall slowed, and she could feel her feet touching solid ground again. The darkness that surrounded her began to dissipate, replaced by a faint, eerie glow. She stumbled forward, her hands brushing against the rough, uneven surface beneath her feet. She couldn't see much, but the air was heavy with a deep, oppressive silence. The mist had followed her into the rift, still swirling around her legs like a living thing. But now, it seemed to recoil, as though even the darkness itself feared what lay ahead. Claire's heart raced as she pushed forward, the dim green glow flickering weakly in the distance. She felt the pull of it like a magnet drawing her in. It was the source, the core of the land's curse. She could feel the earth beneath her vibrating, alive with an ancient power, like the beating heart of some monstrous creature. When she finally reached the source, Claire gasped. Before her lay a vast, cavernous space, a hollow within the earth so large it seemed to stretch on forever. The walls of the cavern were jagged and twisted, like the roots of some great, ancient tree, stretching upward toward the ceiling. The green light emanated from a massive, pulsating mass at the center of the cavern, a dark, organic form that seemed to pulse in time with the very rhythm of the earth. It was as though the land itself had a heartbeat, and this was the heart of it all. The air around her thickened, swirling with power, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to undulate like the surface of a living creature. The source of the curse was here, alive, sentient, and waiting. It had been waiting for centuries, millennia, and now Claire was standing at its heart. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't let fear consume her now. This was it, the moment she had been fighting for. She had to end it here, or else the curse would spread again, more powerful than before. But as she stepped closer to the pulsating mass, a voice echoed in her mind, sending chills down her spine. "You think you can destroy me?" The voice rumbled, low and guttural, like the growl of a beast from the deepest pits of the earth. "You think you can end what has lasted for so long? You are nothing, Claire. Nothing but a fleeting speck in the face of eternity." Claire's heart skipped a beat. The voice. It was the same voice that had spoken to her through the mist, the voice of the land itself. The thing that had once been trapped beneath the earth was now awake. It was speaking to her, trying to break her resolve, to weaken her will. "You will never escape me. You will never be free. The land is mine, and I will consume you as I have consumed so many others." The ground beneath her feet trembled, and Claire stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was everywhere, filling her mind, pressing down on her thoughts, suffocating her. But she couldn't give in. She couldn't let the curse win. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "I won't let you do this," she muttered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I will destroy you. You will never have this land again." The pulsating mass seemed to react to her words, the glow intensifying, the ground shaking with the force of its power. It was as though the very earth itself was responding to her defiance, its hunger growing stronger with every word she spoke. "You cannot destroy what is eternal," the voice hissed, growing louder, more desperate. "You cannot kill what is the very foundation of life itself." But Claire was not afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. She reached in her bag, pulling out the small vial of dust, the very same dust that had been given to her by the ancient woman who had warned her of the curse. The dust was their last, the key to breaking the curse once and for all. Her hands shook as she uncorked the vial and poured the dust into her palm. It glimmered faintly in the green light, and for a moment, Claire felt a surge of hope. She had no idea if it would work, but she had to believe. She had to trust that this was the answer. With a deep breath, Claire stepped forward, holding the dust in her outstretched hand. As she reached the pulsating core, the mist swirling around her legs, she spoke the words the woman had told her to speak, the incantation to break the curse. The ground trembled again, louder this time, the cavern shaking as though the very earth was in agony. The mist surged upward, swirling around her like a violent storm, but Claire held her ground. She would not let fear control her. And then, as the final words left her lips, the dust in her hand began to glow with a brilliant white light. The ground cracked beneath her feet, and the entire cavern seemed to quake. The pulsating mass at the center of the cavern began to shudder violently, as though it were being torn apart. Claire felt a shockwave of energy radiate outward from the core, knocking her to the ground. The light in her hand flared brighter, blinding her for a moment. And then everything went still. The earth fell silent. The mist that had once surrounded her dissipated, vanishing into the air like a fading dream. The pulse of the land, the heartbeat of the curse, had stopped. Claire lay on the ground, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. She could still feel the tremors of the earth beneath her, but they were fading. The oppressive weight that had hung over her for so long was gone. The land was no longer alive with the curse. It was still. She pushed herself to her feet, trembling but alive. The mass that had once pulsed with dark energy was now nothing more than a lifeless husk, a charred and broken remnant of the evil that had once consumed the land. It was over, but as she stood there, staring at the remains of the heart of the land, Claire realized that she was not alone. Behind her, in the darkness, a shape moved. Claire's heart skipped a beat. The shape behind her was moving, its presence unmistakable. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows of the cavern, stepping into the pale, flickering light. It was tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed an unnatural shade of green. Its skin was a mottled gray, and its limbs were unnaturally long, twisted, and elongated like branches of an ancient tree. Its face, once human, was now something monstrous, an unsettling mixture of man and beast, its features warped and contorted by the curse. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the creature took another step toward her. It wasn't just any creature. This was the source of the land's malevolent power, the thing that had been bound deep beneath the earth, hidden from the world for centuries. And now it was free. It had been waiting, watching, feeding off the land, and now that the core had been destroyed, it was no longer bound by the curse. You think you've won? The voice that emerged from its twisted mouth was deep, resonant, and dripping with malice. You think the land is free of me? You know nothing. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. The incantation, the dust, it had destroyed the heart of the curse, but it hadn't been enough to destroy the creature itself. The land might be silent, but this thing, this ancient horror, was still very much alive. She took a step back, her mind racing. She had no more weapons, no more tricks. There was nothing left to fight with except her resolve. You're the land itself, Claire whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. You're the one who's been controlling everything, manipulating the people of the village. All of this, it was your doing. The creature hissed, its long fingers curling into claws. Yes, I am the land. I am the root of all that grows, the foundation upon which this world stands. And now that I am free, I will reclaim what is mine. I will spread my power far and wide, and all will bend to my will. Claire's stomach twisted in horror as the creature's form seemed to shimmer and distort, its power growing with each passing second. It was no longer just a force of nature. It was a living, breathing monstrosity, and it had tasted freedom. There would be no stopping it now. But Claire refused to back down. She couldn't. Not after everything she had been through. Not after losing Henry. Not after watching the village fall into ruin. I won't let you, Claire said, her voice steady despite the terror rising in her chest. I don't care what you are. I'll stop you. I'll end this. The creature's laugh echoed through the cavern, low and guttural. You think you can defeat me? You are but a speck of dust, insignificant and frail. You cannot fight what you cannot see, what you cannot touch. You cannot fight me. Claire's heart was pounding, but she wasn't listening to it. She wasn't listening to the fear creeping up her spine. She was focusing on the creature, the thing that had been terrorizing the land for centuries. It was no longer just a dark force. It was now fully embodied, fully formed, and she had no choice but to face it. With one final, desperate act of defiance, Claire reached into the pouch on her belt. Her fingers brushed against something cold, something sharp. She pulled it out, her hand trembling slightly, and held it up before her. The ancient knife, the one she had found at the heart of the village. It had been passed down through generations, once wielded by the very people who had been the land's first protectors. The blade was small but sharp, its edge glinting in the dim light. It had always felt like more than a weapon. It felt like a key, a symbol of hope. Claire raised the knife high, her voice steady as she spoke the words she had learned from the woman in the village. The incantation was simple but powerful, a prayer to the land, a a final plea for mercy. "I call upon the earth," she said, her voice echoing through the cavern. "I call upon the spirits of the land, the ones who have been silenced by this creature's curse. I ask for your strength, your power, your guidance. Help me end this." The creature snarled, its eyes glowing brighter, more furious. It lunged forward, its claws slashing the air, but Claire didn't flinch. She didn't back down. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice trembling, but unwavering. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, and a surge of power erupted from the earth itself. The air seemed to ripple as though the land was awakening, stretching, fighting back against the creature that had controlled it for so long. The green light that had once pulsed from the creature's core was now growing dim, flickering as though it were being drained by some unseen force. The creature howled in rage, its twisted form writhing in the light as the land fought back. Its claws lashed out at the walls of the cavern, but they were no longer able to connect. The earth was rejecting it, pulling the power from the creature, siphoning its strength until it began to weaken, its form flickering, dissolving like smoke in the wind. "You cannot stop me," the creature screeched, but the voice was faltering, losing strength. "I am the earth. I am eternal." But as the words left its mouth, the land responded. The walls of the cavern shuddered, and the ground beneath the creature's feet cracked wide open. The light that had once surrounded it now turned white-hot, blinding Claire, and she had to shield her eyes. For a moment, everything was silent, and then the creature was gone. Claire blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. The land, the cavern, the very earth itself seemed to breathe once more, calm and peaceful. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on her for so long had lifted, and the silence fell, liberating. She lowered the knife, her body trembling from the sheer force of what had just happened. The power had been overwhelming, more than she had ever imagined, but it was over. The beast beneath the earth, the land's dark master, was gone. But as Claire stood there, catching her breath, the feeling of emptiness settled in her chest. Henry, she had lost him. The journey had cost her more than she could ever repay. Her mind was filled with grief, but also relief. She had done it. She had destroyed the curse. The land was free. But now, the question remained. What would become of her? The silence was all-encompassing. The deep, oppressive stillness that had weighed heavily on the land for so long was finally gone. For a brief moment, Claire stood there, alone in the cavern, the air cool and still. Her eyes adjusted to the light, and the faint, lingering echo of the creature's screeches faded into the distance. The land was at peace, but the relief was short-lived. It was hard to ignore the emptiness that gnawed at her heart, the ache of loss that had taken root long before the battle with the creature had even begun. Henry, the thought hit her like a stone, sharp and painful. She had come so far, fought so hard, and still, she had lost him. She had lost so many. The village, its people, the friends and strangers whose lives had been torn apart by the curse. She had won, but at such a steep cost. Claire wiped away a tear, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She didn't know where to go from here. She had nothing left but the remnants of a broken world and the fading echoes of the past. Her feet felt heavy as she made her way back through the cavern, the ground now firm and steady beneath her. The pulsing green light from the creature's core had faded entirely, replaced by a soft, natural glow that came from the earth itself. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like the land was breathing again, slowly but steadily. As Claire approached the entrance of the cavern, she paused. The rift that had once been a gaping wound in the earth had sealed itself. The land had healed. There was no sign of the creature, no sign of the darkness that had once consumed it. It was over. The land was free. But still, the question remained. Where did she go from here? As if answering her unspoken thought, the ground began to shift beneath her feet. Claire froze, her body tense, her heart racing. Something was happening. The earth trembled, a gentle vibration that gradually grew stronger. The air around her shifted, the light flickering in the cavern as though it were alive. Claire's hand instinctively reached for the knife, still hanging by her side, but it was unnecessary. The land was not attacking her. The trembling was not a threat. It was a message. She lowered the knife, sensing that the land itself was trying to communicate with her. The soft thrum of energy beneath her feet was a song, a call, a request, maybe. The earth was no longer just a passive observer. It had life in it again, and it was reaching out. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the cavern, where the remnants of the dark mass still lay, crumbled into dust and debris. But something new was emerging from the rubble. A small sprout, a green shoot, poked through the dirt, its tender leaves unfurling in the light. It was slow at first, then faster, almost as if it were responding to her. The earth was healing itself, just as she had hoped. Claire knelt down beside the sprout, her hands trembling as she touched the soft leaves. It was a symbol of life returning to a place that had once been suffocated by the curse. She felt a deep sense of peace wash over her, a profound connection to the land. The weight in her chest, the grief, the loss, didn't disappear, but it lessened. This was the beginning of something new, something beautiful. It wasn't the end of the story, but a turning point. The world had been broken, but now it had a chance to heal. As the plant grew stronger, Claire stood up, wiping her hands on her pants. She felt a stirring in her chest, a sense of purpose, faint but undeniable. A path lay before her, though she didn't yet know where it would lead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something other than grief. She wasn't alone. The land was alive, and with it, so was she. Back in the village, a new light was beginning to shine. The sun was rising above the hills, casting a warm glow across the land. For the first time in years, the village felt still, quiet, and safe. The cursed mist had lifted, and the remnants of the plague that had once ravaged the land seemed to fade into the distance. People were beginning to rebuild, planting new crops, repairing homes, and sharing stories of survival. It was as if the land itself had decided to give them another chance to start again. Claire stood on the outskirts of the village, watching the world breathe anew. She didn't know where her journey would take her next, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay here. Her time in this place was done. As she took a final look at the village, at the people who had survived, at the memories that would always stay with her, Claire turned and began to walk toward the horizon. The future was uncertain, but the land was healing. And with each step she took, she felt that healing sink deeper into her soul. She wasn't just running away. She was moving forward. The road ahead was long, but it was hers to travel. And with that, Claire walked into the unknown,